What's up, everybody? This is episode 101. Yes, we just reached the 100 episode milestone with our good friend Isaac Green from the PSA Cardinals. Yeah, for those who haven't seen any of our episodes as of late, go check out our episodes on YouTube, Facebook, and IGTV. But before we start, shout out to our sponsors, the Players Circle. It's the new interactive apps for all student athletes everywhere. For all good merch, and if you want to upload some pictures or videos of yourself doing some basketball stuff, go check it out on the App Store, the Players Circle. But without further ado, we have a very, very, very esteemed guest tonight. He is basketball royalty in the city of Boston. He has had plenty of NBA players come through his program. He's also been a scout for the Boston Celtics and coached professionally for many, many years. Without further ado, I give you Mr. Leo Papile. Leo, thank you for coming on to share your testimony.
Well, first of all, anytime you get to be on the stage in the Big Apple, that's an honor, and I think esteemed is a great word. I think that's a nice way of saying it. You're an old guy, so I mean, you've been doing this stuff for a long, long time. But I know I've seen you on around the game, around the world at many different sites, and it's always a pleasure to catch up and share our knowledge and our history, and between our two great cities. And I've always been my grandparents came to America. They first stopped in New York, so I always thought that New York was our original family home. So
wow.
That's I always looked at New York with esteem. I wasn't one of those anti-Yankee guys up here in Boston. I remember as a boy, I had an uncle who, my father had 10 brothers, and one of his brothers married a gal from the Bronx. So many, many times we'd take that Sunday morning train at 5:00 out of South Station in the fall and go down to Yankee Stadium to see the New York Football Giants. And he would take me to the old garden, not this garden, the old garden. I guess it was the third garden. I think it was 40th Street. And and I remember on the Christmas break going down to watch the ECAC Holiday Festival. That's before the Big East, and that's when they would, St. John's or Army or NYU, one of the big metropolitan programs, would be the host, and you'd have 7 other teams going at it for 3 days, an 8-team tournament. Of course, this is before college basketball on TV, and this is before, the Big East. So if you got a chance to see, I remember probably this winter of '65, Jimmy Walker, a Boston guy, put up 50 in the old garden against BC. Bob Cousy was a New York guy. So my New York, I've always been like, to me, it's just a long subway ride away, going to New York. And all the years going down there to play with the BABC in our program and playing the great New York teams going back. We started out in 1977 with our program. This will be season 44, hopefully, when COVID goes away. We've always had an affinity for New York and New York basketball.
Indeed. So my very first question for you is, what is Leo Papile's coaching philosophy?
I've always been a guy that liked defense, offense off the defense. Long before analytics, I think we figured out that if you got the ball 50 times and I got the ball 60 times, then I think I'll beat you. And that was my analytics. And the way to do that is what thing we call takeaways. Like I said, we were always a full court pressure outfit. When you get the ball, we didn't just get back on defense and fall back on defense and hope to challenge a shot or hope to miss a shot. We said, hey, why can't we get that ball back and get us an extra possession? Extra possessions to me led to wins. So we always had an aggressive defense was always, our philosophy.
Now, my next question is, talk about your beginnings with basketball. Like, when did basketball first start with you?
Well, I think most of us start out playing, and I grew up in a section of the city where basketball was very, very popular in the 60s. And having grown up in the 60s, as us old timers will know, or young folks that were historians, that was the era of the NBA when the NBA had 9 teams. And one of them was the Boston Celtics. in my youth, I was born in 1954, between 1958 season and 1969 season, those 13 years, Celtics won 11 championships. Between 60 and 69, I didn't miss too many of those games. I was in the old Garden all the time. And you got to understand at that time, like I said, when there was 19, the entire East was the Boston Celtics, the New York Knicks, the Syracuse Nationals, and the Philadelphia Warriors. So the NBA had a different way of doing things. They would play double headers. So just hypothetically, in the Eastern Division, you'd see a game where at 6 o'clock, the Knicks would be playing the Warriors with Will Chamberlain, and the Celtics would be playing Syracuse. And then they'd go to Syracuse by train and then flip opponents. And then the third night they'd go to the Garden, the old Garden in New York, or go to Philly and flip opponents. So as a young kid, I was sort of taken by the NBA and that Celtic Bill Russell era, which there were multiple Hall of Famers, winning a lot of championships. So it impacted me as a kid. Boy, the whole Red Auerbach Russell regime that was all about winning. So that had an enormous impact on me as a boy, as a child. Started playing the game. I thought I was going to be Will Chamberlain. I was 6'2", 6'3" when I was 12, but I stopped growing. So I had to put the football helmet on and share that. But, the whole culture and environment of basketball up here in Boston, there were a lot of guys that grew up in that area that went on, Jimmy Calhoun, Mike Jarvis, they're a little older than me, but, we knew each other on the playgrounds and things like that. And we kind of all idolized that Celtic crew, because you had Cousy that came out of Andrew Jackson High School and the PSAL and the Queens, and Heinsohn, who came up right from Catholic school right across the river in Union City, New Jersey. So again, the New York influence was big. And for a little kid like me growing up here with access to the Garden, it was a big deal. And the other thing is, back then our high school tournament, the regional to Eastern Mass tournament, the nickname was the Tech Tourney. If you qualified for that, all your games were in the Garden. I was fortunate enough to play in the Garden 9 times in high school, and a lot of meaningful games. And those games would sell out in high school. So the basketball culture here that I was exposed to as a boy, that, to answer your question, that I sort of drowned in it in a good way, if you know what I'm saying. Basketball was a big deal, and you start at the finest, because the NBA only had 9 teams, 4 in the East and 5 in the West. Jerry West in Baylor, Oscar Robertson, Cincinnati in the West, Bob Pettit at St. Louis. You'd see these guys, 80-game schedule. They played 11, 12 times a year. So you got to know those guys up front and personal. It wasn't like today. We take the subway 50 cents to get in. It'd be 5,000, 6,000 people at the game. You'd sit down and right in the front row, and the Celtic guys would get to know you, and they say, hey kid, how you doing? Things like that. So, it wasn't like today where basketball players like rock stars and rap stars and security. It was a lot different. It was just like you were walking in the gym watching these grown men play, and they would enormously impact you as a kid. Like when we'd see Elgin Baylor as a kid, and the moves he had, and he could hang in the air, and his agility and his strength. We'd go out to the playground and try to be that guy, so the whole impact of the 1960s NBA really ended up pointing me in that direction.
Now, how was Leo Papile the basketball player?
Well, up until the time I was 13, I was like the king of the city. When I stopped growing, I was a guy that kind of bounced around, got a basketball scholarship to an NAIA school, played in the NAIA Nationals and all that, played a lot on the playgrounds, played some football. But I would be what they'd call an undersized center today. I was back to the basket in the post, wide body type guy, clever, below the rim. But I love to play and love to play with my boys. Back then, CYO basketball was big. So you play with your boys from like your street against the parish down the street and the boys from that street. So we played a lot of outdoor basketball in the 60s and things of that nature. It kind of defined who you were and kind of defined what your neighborhood was about. And we went at it. You're playing outside on that pavement in the summertime. And if it wasn't a game like in the recreation league in the summer where they had a ref or maybe 2 refs if you were lucky. You played pickup and you called your own fouls. You know, a lot of rough dudes, you know, guys coming back from Vietnam and stuff like that. So guy comes back from Vietnam, he's seen a lot of combat. You know, if I'm 13, 14 years old and he's 19 and I call a foul on him, he may just say, I don't see it that way. So now you got to fight. You fight on your hands. So you no longer were a boy, you're a man. You know, it wasn't structured like it is today, if you know what I mean. It was kind of like, all right, we pick teams, you pick your team, I pick mine, and we go at it. And there was so many kids understand the baby boom. Like my high school was a public school. I think, ninth grade was considered part of what they call the junior high system, which is now middle school. 10th, 11th, 12th grade, there were about 2,500 kids, 750, 800 kids in a class. So there was a lot of bodies, you know, the baby boom after World War II. So I was just reminiscing last night. It was a great time to grow up in basketball. And again, the influence of Bill Russell, who the greatest winner of all time, and that crowd, Cousy, Havlicek, Sam Jones, Casey Jones, Heinz, and God rest some of their souls. You know, those guys you looked up to them, and they were accessible to you. They were accessible to you too. Well, they would practice the Celtics in a little city gym called the Tobin Gym. It was just, and they didn't really have a permit. They would just show up in the morning and practice. They'd come out their cars, and we'd just go over there, put up shots, and all of a sudden they say, "Hey, kid, you mind if we use the floor? We're going to practice." It was a much different culture it was today in terms of the formality of it. You know, from street ball, you know, all the way up to the pro level. So if you like to play, there was a place for you to play.
Wow, man, that's dope. Let's talk about, you know, your days at North Quincy High School as an athlete when you were a Red Raider.
Yeah, well, you know, I was fun. We were reminiscing about, we were in the Greater Boston League, which was all the big cities in and around Boston, Somerville, Malden, Medford, Revere, Chelsea, and New Bedford, which was about, 40 miles south. They joined up. There was such a big school. And those games in those days, they were serious. The JV game would start at 6:30, and the varsity game would start at 8. And at North Quincy, they did over a new gym about 1963, and it held about 1,800 people. To people today, that was like the 8th wonder of the world. That place would be packed, by the time the 6:30 JV game started. And when I was in 10th grade, the big deal was, can you get on the varsity roster? And if you did, you play 2 quarters of JV, and then you'd go up and you'd go down and get in the varsity locker room. And if the varsity needs, you had 2 more quarters to play. You had 4 quarters of eligibility. And it was great. I mean, I remember my sophomore year, both of our guards ended up getting drafted. Of course, the NBA draft was deeper than 10 rounds. And we went into the Garden and played a Boston English, which would be like Boys High at the time. They were like the City League school that was, the Garden was sold out, and we played them in a tournament, 1-point game. And then junior year made the tournament again. Senior year, we were one of the top ranked teams in New England going in, had kind of a hiccup, ended up missing the tournament by 1 game. You had to win 70% of your games to go to the tournament. So the limit was 20, so you had to go 14-6. And over that period, between 60, before I got there and after I got there, in a 10-year period, only 2 teams won the Greater Boston League. North Quincy, which was on Boston's south border, we'd be sort of like Brooklyn, and then Somerville on the other side, which would sort of be like the Bronx, in terms of geography. Boston didn't have the boroughs, but they had separate cities which were sort of like boroughs that bordered on, like, downtown. And it was a great time to be an athlete in the Greater Boston League. Football games were Saturday afternoons. Very common to have 8,000 to 10,000 people at a football game. Don't forget now, there's the pros are limited. The NBA had 9 teams. The American Football League was here. The Boston Patriots played at Fenway Park. I went to all those games. So if you're a high school athlete, the pros were so accessible, and there was not a whole lot of pros, no TV, not so much of pro games. So being a high school athlete, you were a big deal. If you were part of that varsity team, you were kind of like, a big deal in terms of the community. And if your team won, your community supported you. high school sports was like going to the military. Once you got onto a varsity level, if you were good enough to get there in 10th grade, I had that opportunity and stuff, and it really made you, feel good. I mean, at the end of the year, you might get a jacket. You might not have the hype today. You didn't have the internet. You didn't have YouTube. Or you playing, but your rep would spread by how well your team would do, and fortunately the program there at North in football and basketball in that era, we were really good, really good. The number of Division I kids in football and basketball. Back then it wasn't even Division I, II, and III. It was called the University Division for the big schools and the college division for what is now Division II and III. Things were simpler, and my memories at North Quincy High, being part of that whole era, and having great coaches. Football coach Carleone, he had gone to Brown. He was Joe Paterno's roommate. He had played for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Our basketball coach Nabi Nolan was a guy who was an All-American at UMass and played in the Canadian Football League. So had two head coaches that played pro sports. Those guys were like gods to us, and whatever they said went. It was a little different. Now, if you had a bad day, you may get your ass beat, and you couldn't go home crying about it, and then you get your ass beat again. It was a different world. Some of the stuff that went on, like them poor coaches, if I tried it today, they'd come for me with handcuffs. I'd be on CNN, man beats up boy, but
wow.
But that's just how it went. Like if you go offside and the offensive football, maybe once they tell it, next time the guy come up and smack you in the head, what's wrong with you? You dumb this and that. It was, but it was a different world. Did it work for me? Because for me, here's one thing I tell young kids all the time. You might have been scared of the police. You may have been a little scared of your father, your uncle, whoever your male role model was. But the guy you were most scared of was your coach. Not really scared of your principal. You know why? You were scared of your coach, because if he all of a sudden decided you were weren't good enough, or you were like a wise guy, he'd take that playing time away from you, and there's nothing you could do. Like, you didn't really have the options. There was, like, today you got your travel team, your club team, your AU team, whatever you want to call it. Back then you had your school team in the playground, and that was it. So the high school sports was really, really, really important, and you did what you had to do. And if that dude ended up a basketball coach, he used to smoke a cigar during practice, and he'd go in there yeah, exactly. And we used to have the Greater Boston League played on Tuesday nights and Friday nights, but like clockwork. Those are 2 nights you played, and if you won on Friday night, you wouldn't practice Sunday. We found out later, because all them coaches would go out to the bar, and by the time they got home, it would be Saturday. They'd be out celebrating, and we won. Now, if we lost on a Friday night, and which wasn't too often for us, the coach would have you in on Saturday morning, and he still might have gone to that bar, so he would be in a bad mood. So practice at 7 a.m. You're down there, and all of a sudden, you know what this dude's going to do. And God forbid you bust the play, or he don't think you're giving enough effort, or things of that nature, you're going to get smacked. And you just took it like you took it like a man. That was part of the drill. And that was that era. A lot of these coaches have been World War II guys, seen a lot of combat. They're rough dudes now. It was the personification of my way or the highway. So it was serious. Like the old saying, "Hey, that dude don't fool around." Well, that's what it was. So as a player, you didn't fool around. Once you got that jersey, you'd fight to keep it. To keep that jersey, because you weren't letting nobody take it away from you. You may fight more to keep that jersey than you did if someone tried to come and take your money. And none of us had a whole lot of money in my neighborhood, so money was important too. But that jersey, once you got it, man, oh man, that was your most prized possession. So you did what you had to do to stay aboard. And at North Quincy, Quincy, there were two high schools, literally 2 miles apart, with probably 5,000 kids between grades 10, 11, 12, maybe 5,500 kids. So the rivalry was big. With the big urban schools in that era, the big public schools. And you had your Catholic League, a lot like you did in New York, which we all know at that time, you look at the alumni that came out of the Catholic League in New York in the 60s, it's like a who's who of Hall of Famers.
Right.
We didn't have quite the quality. We were always a little New York, in terms of numbers. If don't forget, like, all the boroughs back then equaled about 9 million people. Boston 600,000, Quincy 100,000, Somerville 100,000, Cambridge 100,000. So the numbers in the city of Boston didn't equal the numbers that there were in New York City, and probably the ratio of big time prospects was probably like back then there'd be maybe one national magazine come out a year, and you'd read about. I'll tell you a great story. When I was in the 6th grade, I was big, so all the Catholic schools would recruit you. So one day I'm coming out of church, and assistant coach from Catholic Memorial says, "Hey son, you want to go to game today? Catholic Memorial is playing Powell Memorial." So I said, "Yeah." He said, so I figured it was like somewhere in Boston. And so he says, "All right, we're going to come back in an hour and get you guys." So I'm waiting outside the church. They come. We go to Newport, Rhode Island. There was a De La Salle High School. And I get down there and I see a guy named Lou Alcindor, later became Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Wow.
They were playing Catholic Memorial. This would have been December of '64. I'm 10 and 6th grade. And I watched, and Catholic Memorial was undefeated. The Boston team, the great Ronnie Perry coached at Catholic Memorial. They had a guy named Ron Texiera who was at Catholic Memorial, and they were the consensus number 1, number 2 players in the country. Texiera was a big fella, about 6'9", and Power beat them. And back then, the key was only 6 feet wide. So Kareem would set up shop on the left block. He'd spin to the baseline, spin back to the middle. And it wasn't a sky hook then; it was a sky dunk, and he was just so graceful. So I'm a guy that was gonna, like, a big kid. I was probably even like 6 foot then, and go to like 6'2", 6'3" in 8th grade. I was a big man. But that night, I said to myself, "Boy, I better keep that football helmet handy because this guy here, I don't think I'm gonna be scoring the post too much on him." Again, that had enormous impact. It's still etched in my mind, and of course. As he evolved into the NBA with the Milwaukee Bucks initially, the great rivalry with the Celtics in the early 70s, Kareem became a guy that to me was like superhuman, and he used to go to summer school up here at Harvard. He was a brilliant man. He's written books and things of that nature. And while he was in the summer school, I would say the summers, he was a rookie in the NBA in 70s, summers of 70, 71, 72. He was at Harvard summer school. He would play in what was called the BNBL, was the neighborhood league in the summer, and they had an open division, for men, for grown men. Mm-hmm. Pros would play like they did. It wasn't like today, like the NBA had a summer league, and they weren't playing for their NBA teams. Pro dudes would just show up and get on a team and play. So we saw him play in the BNBL Open League, and actually got to play against him a couple of times in that, and it was just, you said to yourself, man, oh man. Like this brother's from a different planet. He is just the gracefulness, the unstoppableness. I still say this in the history of the NBA: if I'm down 1 and it's for the championship, and I got the ball half court after a timeout, and there's one guy I got to go to for the 2. I don't care if you're going to triple team him. I'm throwing a bounce pass into the post on the left block, and let the big fella spin baseline, come back with that sky hook, and I'm going to win. To me, he was the most devastating weapon in the history of the game. And that's a great segue into New York basketball in that era too, coming out of the Catholic League. There's so many guys. So again, for me, moving on and I think I was the youngest head coach in NBA pro basketball history. In the Eastern League, which became the CBA in 1977 at 23. I was the head coach and GM. And when the owner signed me, I said, "Look, I'm younger than these dudes. I got to be the highest paid guy, or they're not going to respect me." And my pay was $50 a game. And, of course, the Eastern League, Allentown, Pennsylvania, Lancaster, PA, Rochester, New York, all them AAA, American Hockey League, minor league baseball town. So, Saturday and Sunday we'd play. The way it worked is on a Saturday, we'd get in a car, drive down to Pennsylvania or wherever, I think the farthest team was down in D.C., Jersey Shore. There were 9 or 10 teams. And then you drive home, no hotels, no one had any dough for that. And you play the same team at home Sunday. So that team that beat your ass on a Saturday, now they had to get up 6 o'clock in the morning Sunday and drive way up to Boston to play us on Sunday night. And, I look at that team, and that's 77, 78 season. We had 2 guys. One guy had been the number 11 pick, God rest his soul. He just passed away, Bobby Bigelow, in the 1975 draft. Another guy they call White Magic, Frank Olenek, out of Bridgeport, Connecticut, who had been the number 4 pick in the 76 draft, the Seattle Supersonics, coached by Bill Russell. So we had 2 guys who had been lottery picks playing for $49 a game, $1 less than me. Yeah, and that you look back, the historians, you can dig out the old EBA. It became the CBA that next year because a team from Alaska came in. So they changed the name to be appropriate, because I think there were 8 teams in the East and Anchorage, Alaska in the West. And that again, it segued me into pro basketball. I coached some college ball in between those years and things of that nature, but and then went on to to the NBA stuff. We can get to that later.
Yeah. So first and foremost, shout outs to the graduating class, to the North Quincy High School graduating class in 1972.
70. I was actually 71. I was supposed to be 72, and the 72 teams in the Hall of Fame. And when they put me in the Hall of Fame there, they had my name on a 72 team that went undefeated. I graduated at 16. Not that I was a good student. Yeah, but I played my senior year in basketball at 16, and most of the dudes were 19. So my father was a cop in town. He's kind of an old school guy. He said, "Look at you, you're a big dude. I'm going to start you early because kids are going to make fun of you if you go to school with kids your own age because you're going to be too big." So I was a big, thick dude and all that stuff, weighed 220 pounds when I was like 12. So I was a couple of years ahead of myself. So it should have been 72, but I was done there in 71. So you did a really good job researching. And that's the funny part of that. This is my 50th high school reunion, so I'm officially an old man. Once you hit your 50th reunion, you're an old man. So you're bringing back great memories.
Shout outs to the North Quincy High School graduating class in 1971.
71. All my boys were in 72 because you played CYO and stuff. You play when you age. So all my best friends were and guys I still talk to were in the class of 72 because they were more age appropriate, I guess, for me. You know what I mean? Because you had guys in the 71 class that were graduating in 19. They were acquaintances, but they were kind of in different social circles.
Right. So you went to college early.
Very early. Yeah. When I enrolled, I just turned 17 a few weeks before.
So you went to Keene State first?
Yes. Yeah. And that was on a basketball scholarship deal because they're in their NAIA team. And back then, we addressed the fact that, the Division 2 and 3 didn't exist. NAIA basketball all across America was really, really serious. You had a New England division, they had playoffs, and able to, the competition was phenomenal. We had a coach at Keene State, Glenn Thulin, who'd been an assistant in Indiana, in the Big Ten. Somehow he found his way to New Hampshire. I think he saw me play in the Garden one night, Boston Garden, and offered me a scholarship. And he brought in 4 guys from Vincennes Junior College that had won the National Junior College Championship the year before, which was another real big deal. There was one guy off that Vincennes team that he didn't bring. He tried to get, but he didn't get. That guy was called Bob Mcadoo, who went to the University of North Carolina, who, was an NBA weapon and still works for the Miami Heat. Mac's a good friend. And he was something. So the 4 other guys that came from Vincennes to Keene State basically were able to, share a lot of stories about Mcadoo. So, and again, that had an influence because you had guys that had been around a real deal guy like Mcadoo. If Mcadoo was around today, he'd be a super max guy. You look at his numbers in the Buffalo Braves in the early 70s. I mean, double doubles just were no big. That's just, I think he averaged a double double for his career. When I'm talking about probably 28, 29 points and 15, 16, 17 rebounds. I don't have those numbers in front of me, but you could pull them up. There were guys like that, and they were the Buffalo Braves, an upstate New York team he was on, and they had a vicious rivalry with the Celtics in that era, in the Celtics 70s era with Havlicek and Collins, and that was the NBA. I reference it all the time. The NBA was a grown man's league. Mm-hmm. Like if you couldn't fight, you'd get punked. And if a guy got in a fight, ref would just sit you down for a minute or call you a foul or something of that nature. You know what I'm saying? So the NBA was a different animal back then. It was a grown man's league. The great Knicks team of that early 70s era. Those weren't guys you all saying you don't want to fool with them. If you got in somebody's way, you're gonna get hit. And it wasn't like to the Sterner where they came in and started suspended guys for fighting in the fines. Back then, like you'd say, if a guy you're gonna fight, you might fight, you go sit for a while, and you go back in the game. Mm-hmm. I witnessed a lot of that stuff, and it was really, really something. Wow.
So you didn't get to finish school, did you?
No, no, I never did. Back then, I missed they ended the drafts for Vietnam because I would have been draft eligible at 18, which would have been in 72. They ended the draft, right? I probably would have ended up in the military in Vietnam. I was torn. Do I want to join? Do I not want to join? I kind of went into I was in the nightclub business, really. Like these roughnecks in my neighborhood had this club called the Boston City Club, and the club was up by BU at Commonwealth Ave, and because I was a big guy, and
they had to bring you on.
Yeah, so I was the doorman, and I never forget my pay was $11 a night. Now you got to understand,
that's it, $11 a night.
And I was the highest paid guy, and I got to pick 20 guys to be my bouncers for $9 a night. So back then, like in Boston, like if you were in Dorchester, that neighborhood, which was full of, Catholic parishes, mm-hmm. If you saw two dudes, two Irish American dudes, and one guy was from St. Brendan's and one guy was from St. Anne's, and they bump into each other in that club, they're going to fight just because they're from the wrong parish. It wasn't racially tinged. It's just territory. So I had the assignment of I'm making that $11 a night. I said, what do I got to go to school for? Like $50 a week. I mean, cops were making $75 a week in that era. So that $50 a week, I was a kingpin, having that dough. And so what happened was I got, there were a lot of guys in the neighborhood that played college ball. We got together and started what we call a semi-pro team in this Cranberry League. Mm-hmm. So, most of the guys had played college ball. Some cases played pro ball. So that's how I got my start I was a player coach. I was the youngest guy, and I hurt my knee. So they said, well, you hurt. Why don't you sit out the year you coach us this year? Mm-hmm. I had what was an ACL. Back then they called it torn ligaments. And what they did to you, they just put a cast on you, like a plastic cast from your hip to your ankle. That cast would be on for 6 months. When you came out, your leg would be like a toothpick. I was playing outside one time. I went up to dunk the ball, and there was like a blade of grass stuck in the concrete, and I slipped on it, and I come down hard. Ended up finishing the game. I couldn't work. Went out, had a few bruised. So I go to the hospital next morning. They take an x-ray. I come out with a cast. So that winter, instead of being the player coach of the semi-pro team, I was the coach. And that lasted for 5 years. And we would play in tournaments, money tournaments. Just say the entry fee for the tournament was $50 or $75 or $100. All that money would go in a pot, and the winning team would get to share out that money. So the winning money might be like $700. Now you talk about, don't forget, NBA players made like $10,000 a year. We were all street dudes and guys that had played in college. We're splitting up $700 between 7 of us. That's blood money, man. We're gonna play that game like it's like there's no tomorrow. So we would get crowds. They didn't charge admission. They would do a thing called pass the hat. They'd get like a scally cap passing around. Right. Everybody throwing a quarter, a buck, and we split up that money too. So that was like my two jobs was working in the club and playing semi-pro basketball, we called it, you know. So, and it was great. You could play every night of the week, and then you play in the money tournaments on the weekends. You'd go to Brockton, you'd go to Plymouth, you'd go to New Haven, you'd go to Hartford, Springfield on the weekends, you know, January, February, March. And it was, that took me from like 1972, 73 through like 77. You know, I a couple of times they wanted me to go back in school and play basketball, football, but UMass and things of that nature. But I just, because I was making a little dough, I just think, nah, that ain't for me. You know, I didn't take a conventional route to the NBA. You know, today they say, son, you got to go get yourself a degree and a master's degree and learn analytics. But I kind of learned ball from the concrete, if you know what I mean. You know, that was my education.
Yeah, let me read you this quote. There was this article from the Boston Globe that came out July 6, 1997.
That's the day I was hired as director of player. No, at my first role at Boston, when Patino and I and Jim O'Brien came out, I was director of scouting. I remember that article well. I was down Martha's Vineyard, and it was, like the guy that wrote it said, well, you can look at it as an indictment, but I'm looking at it as setting the record straight. Dan Shaughnessy wrote that article. You can go ahead and quote
legendary writer. I remember him from the Yankeeography documentaries when they used to talk about the Red Sox and Yankees rivalry.
Yeah, he's in the Baseball Hall of Fame as a writer.
Oh wow!
In Cooperstown, yeah, Danny did. Yeah,
amazing. Wow. So this is the part that you said. You said, I'm a vociferous reader and an amateur historian. I have no interest in any other stuff that goes on in college. I see degrees as a waste of time and money. I don't think I have to debate my intellect with anyone. I accumulate the knowledge on things I'm interested in. That's deep.
Well, you know, maybe that's 99% true. Maybe because I couldn't pass math and biology. That was my way of saying I could pass history or English, and I didn't have the interest. So, you know, that was, that's pretty much true. I didn't, the old saying, I didn't fool around with school, you know, and look back on it. And that was, I remember when I made that quote, I came in the office next day, they were laughing like hell. They're saying, we're always telling kids, you got to get your education. And now all of a sudden you're in the NBA telling kids you don't got to go to school. I said, no, I'm not telling them they don't got to go to school. I'm telling them I didn't go to school. I didn't have the right makeup maybe at that time. You know, I wasn't ashamed of it. And I think that, you know, looking back on that, that's, you know, saying to yourself, if you don't sell yourself short just because you weren't an academic scholar. It doesn't mean you can't succeed in a field, you know, in life, you know, because, you know, a lot of guys go the blue collar route and work as electricians or plumbers and do well. You know, a lot of guys go into law enforcement, you know, things that don't require degrees. So look at me. I was in basketball and I was working in a club. So that those two things didn't require a degree. You had to be able to play, you know, pretty good game to play, and you had to be able to handle yourself to work in a club. So, you know, those two things were those were the prerequisites for me. So that's where my degree was in. It was in like kind of the street, you know.
Well, kids, if you're watching this, any teenagers out there, go to school, stay in school. Everybody,
don't take my path.
Exactly. You know, college is not for everybody. You know, right now, I actually work at an alternative high school in Brownsville, Brooklyn. And we have,
one of my favorite neighborhoods.
So basically, there's a lot of kids for whatever reason, you know, where the traditional public schools discarded them for whatever reason. You know, they had a lot of situations that led them to have to go to that school. You know, a lot of kids, for whatever reason, you know, they don't want to go to college. You know, they want to go into the workforce, which is great. You know what I'm saying? But we all have to have that plan B at the end of the day, because there are people that go to college and they graduate, but they come out with so much debt, and then they want to go to grad school, and they come out with even more debt on top of that. So, you know what I'm saying? Like, I believe in education, but, you know, I don't believe in debt. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm a living example, because right now I have a college degree and I owe around in the neighborhood, somewhere in the neighborhood of 60,000.
Sure.
But I've been good though. I've been good with this pandemic. You know, they like that was probably one of the few good things that Trump did, which was shut down our loans for a whole year. That was the one. That's the one thing I credit him for. But you know, I feel like that kind of helped me because you know the private loans I still paid that all. I still had to, but
Yeah.
you know, for a lot of kids that want to go to college, like if you want to do basketball, you know, go ahead, chase your dreams. But just know that there's millions of other kids out there that want to pursue the same dream as you. And you have to work extremely hard to get to where you want to go. And if you don't make it in basketball, it's okay. But just make sure you have the best grades possible. That's what I would tell
Absolutely.
you.
I probably would have been one of your students.
Yeah,
the alternative school, they would have probably put my ass over there, you know. So
yeah. So let's get into how BABC was formed. Like, how did that come about?
Well, that 1977, when they started that pro team and in the Eastern League, and they asked me to be the coach and GM. I was 23. They kind of said, okay, this guy's 23, but for 5 years he's been playing and coaching these semi-pro teams and, you know, ex-pros and ex-college guys. So it's kind of my niche. So, and I said, now, what can we do to get guys in the neighborhood, in the city, you know, let's get on the map. AAU was just beginning. I'll tell you exactly how it started. We had this team called the O'Brien Club. We went down to the men's AAU nationals. And if you study the AAU history, back in the 50s and 60s, certain guys would choose to play for the AAU men's team as opposed to playing in the NBA. Like you look at the Akron Goodyears, the Phillips 66ers, teams like that, they'd give you a job coming out of college and you'd like be in your desk 5 days a week, and the weekends you'd play in it was the AAU Industrial League, men, grown men in the 20s. So we played in that. We qualified and went down there. And this guy come up to me and said, you know, we're starting the junior men's program and 19 under. We had a team out of New York last year, which was the Riverside Hawks. We'll get to that later. Mm-hmm. Any of you guys want to ever think about starting a team in Boston? I know some of you guys play college. I said, well, give me the information. So I went back in Boston, and of course I was 23, just, you know, not too much older. Went around the city, got involved, you know, with some of the kids. We played pickup on our first team. And how about this? A former New York Knicks coach was on that first team, Dave Blatt. You know, yeah, it was a Coach LeBron in Cleveland. Yeah. And we went down, we played we would play exhibition games up here against the pro guys, get our ass beat. And we went down to the AAU 19U Nationals as a Palm Beach Junior College in 1977. We were kind of like the Cinderella team. We didn't have a whole lot of dough, so we only could bring 7 guys and me. And we won a couple of games, got out the pool, and got to the Final Four against Michigan AAU. And they had a guy named Irvin Johnson. And they ended up beating us in double overtime. So that was the birth of the BABC, 1977. So, you know, my goal is to be able to coach that for 50 years. If I can hang around till 2027, which is, you know, still 6 years from now, they'll give the BABC a 50th anniversary. You know, back then we got going in May, and we played like locally a little bit. And then, you know, there weren't any other teams for us to play. And, you know, I met some guys down there in Palm Beach in that July. In fact, Ainge and I worked together in Boston for 10 years. He was a high school player playing for a team out of Washington, the state of Washington. Oregon and Washington had like one team. It wasn't like today where there were a million teams. And the Riverside Church Hawks were down there with Lorch. Mm-hmm. Albert King was a big timer. He was on that team. So that tournament, I still have that program. About 25 guys made the NBA, some serious ones like Albert King. Albert King and Wayne McCoy were the 2 best players at Riverside. They were the favorites. They got knocked out. We gave, I want to say we lost to Michigan in double overtime. It was a 40-minute game. You play the Olympic rules plus 2 5-minute overtime. I think it was 129, 127. Magic didn't really beat us. A guy named Jay Vincent beat us. He was at Michigan State with Magic, and he's a longtime NBA player. You talk about a wide boy. Look him up. He's about 6'8", but he's about 330 in high school. And he was about, you know, He trimmed down a little bit when he got to Michigan State, maybe to 310, played in the NBA about 300. But man, oh man, he would wear guys out. So that was the first year, 77, and we got it going. You speed ahead to the summer of 78. I ended up owning a bar over in Cambridge, the other side of the city. And people in Cambridge said, there's a big kid. He's only a freshman. You should go take a look at him at Ringe Tech. There were two public schools in Cambridge at the time, Cambridge Latin School and Ringe Tech School. Now it's Cambridge Ringe and Latin. Big fellow's name was Patrick Ewing. So, he comes aboard. First year, he's getting his feet wet. But I kept saying, this guy's going to be real good. They said, well, he's kind of skinny. He don't score. Look, he fouls all the time. They said, why do you think he's going to be good? I said, because he's mean. I said, he was a little kid. Now there was no 15 under, 16 under. We had one team, and there was 19 under. So if you were a senior, you would play. And he's a freshman playing with seniors, and he wouldn't give ground. Anytime you hit him, he hit back. That attitude. He had that heart. So so he helped put us on the map back then. It was amazing because the AAU then would arrange for tours of national teams. Yeah. And back then there was a country called the Soviet Union. It's broken up now, but that's Russia, Lithuania, Ukraine, all big one country. And they would come in May and they would play 8 games across the United States. So, we were starting to get pretty good. So I said, look, why can't they come up here to Boston? So, if you like to research articles, for the first time in May of 1980, they came to Don Bosco High School and we played them. And it was something because if you look back in history in 1980, that was the Olympic boycott by the United States. They didn't go to the Olympics because there was a big deal. The Soviet Union had invaded Afghanistan, and look at how that ended up years later. The United States is still in Afghanistan fighting that same war that the Soviets were fighting. So we get a telegram from the State Department to my house. And back then it was in Texas. A dude would knock on your door with a piece of paper from the State Department. It said, caution, radicals from Afghanistan are enrolled at Tufts at the Fletcher School. They may attempt to disrupt the game with the Soviets because of the invasion. We advise you cancel game because there could be violence, including bombings. So we already rented this gym. And again, none of us had a whole lot of dough. We got to play this game. My father, God rest his soul, was a detective in Boston. He says, don't worry about it. I'll get a bunch of my cops. They're off duty. We'll keep our eye on things. We see any guys with bombs, we'll go get them. This is all unofficial. We played the game and we won the game. And Patrick was a sophomore. That would have been, Patrick was a junior. That was May of 1980. And I remember the whole New York crowd came down. Howie Garfinkel, God rest his soul, Tom Konchalski, they all came down by train, all the 5-star guys. Now, 5-star was the kingpin back then. They had heard about this big kid up in Boston. And that gym, that night was sold out. Don Bosco was a massive gym. It was in the South End. It was in Chinatown. And it was like one of them Indiana gyms. We thought it held about 2,500, 2,800 people. You couldn't get in. So the Afghan terrorists didn't show. If they did, they didn't bomb it. We ended up winning the game, and that helped put us on the map as well. It was 79. Patrick's sophomore year, we beat them. Mike Jarvis was on the bench with me as my assistant, and who later became the St. John's coach. Mike was a good friend, a little older guy that I respected a lot. I owned the bar in Cambridge, and he was at. In that year, the sophomore year, there's 2 Cambridge schools merged. The school, my bar was right around the corner from the bar, and it was something, man. Representing the country and playing against the Soviet Union, our little guys from Boston, and all the coaches were there and all that stuff. But when Garth and Tom Konchalski come down from New York by train, that was like you made it. Now the New York guys are kind of giving you a blessing by coming down and watch your players. We had Paul Little, who was Boston Latin School, went on to be Ivy League Player of the Year 3 times in a row. The only other guy at the time was Bill Bradley at University of Pennsylvania for Portland Trail Blazers. We had a good team. We beat them 85-79, and that kind of put us on the map. BABC, that was that was something, man, playing against the Soviet Union, because what would happen was they would play. We ended up doing that for maybe, right through the 80s. They'd play either their first or last game in Boston and New York, because they would they fly from Moscow into New York. So they either play their first game in New York or their last game in New York. So we would either be the first and the last game. They would go to Detroit, Indiana, Chicago, all the hotbeds, and play similar AAU teams from there. So, that's the birth of BABC, basically, back in the late 70s, early 80s. And that's it was different. Like I said, one team. It wasn't no 15 under, 16 and under. If you were in high school, you were eligible to play. And, and back then, the most significant time for kids playing AAU was after their senior year in high school, because there was no NCAA rules didn't allow you to go to summer school on scholarship, and schools back then wouldn't start till September. Mm-hmm. So say you were at like Christ the King or a place like that, and you graduate, and you were born in North Carolina, and you graduate in early June. Now you got to play somewhere in June, July, August before you go off to Carolina. You're going to get rusty. So that's how AU got going. But again, the most significant competition was in the your senior year after you graduated high school. Now that don't happen no more. When a guy graduates high school today, that same kid at Christ the King, if he's going to Carolina, the night he graduates, say he graduates like May 28th, he's on a plane the next morning going to summer school. That's and taking courses and getting ready and working in the training room. Back then, that wasn't available to people. So it was a different world in that regard. So, the objective in AAU was to, you built your team to whereas you the 19 and under, and the 19 and under nationals, they moved them out of Palm Beach to Jacksonville, Florida in that era. And that would be right after the week after 4th of July. That was like your NCAA tournament, going down that 19 and under nationals in that era. And man, oh man, I still got the programs. You name the pro, and he played in that. You name them in that era, 70s and 80s, they all played in that tournament. Only 12 teams qualified. You had to, as it got more popular, you had to win a regional tournament to qualify for it, and we had a phenomenal rivalry with the Riverside Church teams in that era, segueing again into they had a tournament up here, the Boston Shootout, that was hosted by the boys clubs of Boston. And they put us in it in BABC in 82. And it was the Boston, New York rivalry. They played in the hockey arena at Boston University on the first floor, which held about 5,000 people. Championship game was at 4:00. It was an 8-team term. They had the consolation games. That they closed off the street at noontime. That was the Boston, New York rivalry. And there's some great pieces by Shaughnessy too. He would cover that tournament. And that Riverside team, Kenny Smith, who, distinguished pro, Bruce Dalrymple, who was more highly regarded. He might have been National Player of the Year, went on to Georgia Tech, had a solid career. Ernie Myers went on to NC State. Walter Berry was National Player of the Year in the college. The thing I'll tell you about that game, that championship game in 82, Riverside had two kids that were juniors. They both were 6'11". Mm-hmm. Neither one of them got in the game because they weren't good enough yet. Between those two guys, they played 29 years in the NBA, 15 for John Sally and 14 for Olden Paul-Nice. But they were juniors, and it was a seniors game, and it was a 1-point game. Riverside beat us 83-82. I'm still sweating that loss, as they say. Those two guys just weren't good enough to get in the game. Now think about that. Tiny Archibald was coaching with Riverside at that time. New York legend, NBA MVP. At 5'11", he used to get triple doubles and stuff like that. A true New York legend, great man, mentored a lot of kids in the city. So that rivalry. But you think about that for a second. Two dudes who combined for 29 years in the NBA. Sally got a couple of rings with the Pistons. They just you couldn't put them in the game because it was just over their heads. That's no disrespect to those guys. Mm. It's just giving you an idea. Now, Walter Berry in high school, man. I mean, he was a first round pick. I think the number 2 or 3 in the pick in the 86 draft by Portland out of St. John's. St. John's, he was National Player of the Year. Let me tell you something. In high school, man, oh man, he was the truth. They called him. He went to Ben Franklin, I believe. Up in Harlem. And it was. We're playing that game, and the Boston TV channels came over, and who's this BABC? Who's these Riverside Church Hawks out of New York? These kids look like NBA players. We started getting a lot of positive respect, and say these guys are going to New York to play. We used to go down to DC in July to the Urban Coalition gym. They played that indoors at the DC Dunbar Public School on a Sunday afternoon. It was a pro league, but they said, here they are, our special guests from Boston playing the DC Boys Club, the BABC. Patrick would be on a couple of them trips, and I think Georgetown Coach Thompson was able to be there and see him, and all that got going. So that was quite an era. I get kind of chills and goosebumps talking about those days. Again, it was simple. The whole team I had a 1966 Cadillac convertible, and I'd get the 7 guys and put the top down so we could put guys in the back, and the littlest guy would have to lay across the legs of the guys in the back seat so we could get 7 passages of knee in there. We just drive on down to Philly. We get down and play in Sunny Hill at Temple. We drive down to DC. It wasn't like today where it's $600 entry fee and you have pool play. We'd call you up and say, hey, my man, can you put together a game this weekend? We want to come down and play in Brooklyn. And you'd say, yeah, you're going to play Brooklyn, USA with Bernard King and George Johnson. And that was it. It wasn't a tournament. We'd come down, play Saturday afternoon or Saturday night and again Sunday. And we might sometimes just play outside in the park and be all kinds of people, all the girls there, and people barbecuing. It was, again, the analogy I make between then and now, the competition was just as good, in my opinion, better, because you didn't have so many teams. You had you might have had one Brooklyn team, one Boston team. So you had teams with 4, 5, 6 pros on them. But it was, the formality was different. You'd get a couple of your guys to ref, a couple of college guys. You'd say, hey, man, you guys, I got a good team from Boston coming in. You guys, what you doing? I can't afford to pay a big money. So you'd have college refs. You might put up flyers in clubs and flyers in a boys club. People would come. It wasn't like it is today where, there's 64 team tournaments and 8 courts and 8 games going on at once. It was an entirely different culture, entirely different world. But let me tell you something. The level of play was no joke. No joke. I mean, when you went down in New York in them days, if you were to win down there or go in Philly and DC and win, you were pretty good. And we got to the point where we'd go on the road and win. That's what we did. The only real tournament we played in was the AAU Nationals. Everything else was like that. It was like boxing. I call you up, you get your boys, I get mine, and we go play. And we may sleep in the Cadillac all night or sleep out in the park with on blankets. Once in a while we get a hotel with one room in it, one room in a hotel, so everybody can go take a shower. Saturday night, play Sunday afternoon, and just drive on back to Boston. That's how it went. But you develop great bonds with people. If you get some of the guys on those teams, and talk to them, and a lot of them went on to long, distinguished NBA careers, they would remember every word of what I'm saying. They remember games and the score because it impacted us. Because now we're not just playing around the way, we're going out of town. And when you were going to New York in them days, you were going to Mecca. You were going to the kingpin town in New York City in that era, because like when you played a Riverside and then the Gauchos started getting into it, you look at their alumni list in those days, it was very often that all 5 guys on the starting team would play some level of pro basketball. Guaranteed high major, ACC, Big East was getting going 1980. That went without saying. But I can show you box scores, and I got every one of them in boxes. I collect stuff where you'd have New York teams with 5 pros on them. And it was not unusual. Again, you had Riverside Church, you had the Gauchos, and then Doc Naselli, God rest his soul, he started Madison Square Bronco Boys Club. You had really 3 teams. In a city of 9 million people, if you're whacking up the players among 3 teams in New York in that era, a lot of pros. I mean, Tom Kachowski he's a witness. He used to be at all that stuff, watching us, and they respected us. And then 83, the AU wanted to have like an NIT before like the Nationals, and they asked us to host it here. We beat Riverside for the first time. That was Kenny Smith's senior year. Kenny Hutchison was an All-American, probably more high regarded than Kenny Smith. Dalrymple was back. Paul Nice was back. We beat him fair and square up there. So I remember the next day, Garth and Tom called me. They said, "You guys won?" I said, "Yeah." They said, "Who reffed the game?" They thought we cheated them. I said, "You go call Lorch and tell him who reffed the game." We called the CBA and told them to ship in 2 guys. You had a Jersey guy and a New York guy. I remember Jesse Thompson and Vince McKelvey reffed the game. One was from Trenton, one was from Philly. They were pro refs, so they didn't know us from the Riverside. So they said, "You beat them fair and square with refs?" I said, "Yeah." So they kind of like, all right, you guys are gonna be pretty good, and we were. We got our respect that day. That was the day we made our bones. We beat Riverside. Now we're heavyweights. Now we're heavyweight contenders, because again, the New York basketball in that time was another level. They were kingpins, still, but then they would have been what you call the undisputed champions, New York City.
Wow, that's amazing right there. So you went from Patrick Ewing, then you had Dana Barros. How was Dana Barros as a player way back in the day?
Dana was the class of 85, and he was in the backcourt with Rumeal Robinson, who was the class of 86. Let me tell you a story about Dana. I was friendly with Dana's mom, so I used to talk to all the time, and he was, believe it or not, recruited for football, really not basketball. Michigan came in his house, and Anthony Carter won the Heisman Trophy. I think he wore number 2, and Bo Schembechler came in the house, and they gave him a football jersey with Barros, number 2 on it. So you look at that kid, he was small, 5'10", but don't forget Allen Iverson. A lot of people said, we'll get to that later, was a better high school football player than basketball player, a legendary football player. So Dana's 2 choices were Michigan and BC for football. And that winter in the tournament up here, Dana went on a roll. I think he averaged 50 in the spring, in the winter '85 in the state tournament up here. It's a Zavarian High School in the Catholic League right outside the city. Dana commuted out there. So people started saying, well, football, a lot of times they redshirt, maybe he should play some basketball. And the rest is history. Once he devoted full time to basketball, he became so productive a scorer. There was a time when he held all the NBA 3-point scoring records. He had 50-point games in the NBA. So Dana probably, even with his size, could have played in the NFL. He probably would have been a corner or a punt returner or maybe a wide receiver. But Michigan football at the time was a perennial contender for national championship, Rose Bowls, and that. You get recruited by Michigan football. That kind of speaks for itself. So once he decided to give up football, which was probably after his freshman year at BC basketball, the rest is history. When he put full time in the gym, I think when he played 17 years in the NBA, 16 years in the NBA, and was an all-star. I mean, he Rumeal Robinson, he did go to Michigan. That was our backcourt in the 84-85 season. And Rumeal was a lottery pick. I think Dana went 17th in the first round to Seattle. Rumeal went, I think, 10 to Atlanta in the lottery. So that was our backcourt. They're a pretty good backcourt, Dana was a special guy. He still is. He's got a business here, basketball-oriented business. And he had a team little guys, and he called my daughter last year, who actually runs the program. My daughter, Brittany. And he said, I want to call my 6th guy. He used to call them the Dana Barros All-Stars or Dana Barros Basketball. He said, can I call my 6th graders BABC? And we said, absolutely. He's a good dude, and he's done so much for the community. And I'll tell you what, pound for pound, don't forget, Dana's maybe 5'10" on his tiptoes. The guy played 17 years in the league and had 50-point games in the league. And at time, I think in his era was, like I said, the leading 3-point shooter, in the league. That kind of speaks for itself. You can't get no better than that. Yeah,
man. Shout outs to Dana Barros.
Yeah.
Then a few years later, you had another talented point guard by the name of Rick Brunson, who's now the high school who's now the head coach at Camden High School.
I think
New
he might have
Jersey.
stepped down for the season because they weren't going to have it, the high school ball
Oh
yet.
no, he went. Actually, he went back.
Good for him. Yeah. Brunson was the class of '91. He was from up on the North Shore, with Salem, about 18 miles north of the city, up on the seacoast. And Brunson was the class of was '91. He was a McDonald's All-American. He got on the map that previous summer of '90. We go down to Philly, to Temple. Sunny Hill had what they called a Future Stars. And they would bring in teams from all over the East in August. And we were playing the Boo Williams team with Iverson. And Brunson went off for 41, and we beat them. They won the AAU Nationals. And Brunson, of course, he playing in Philly. The word got out, and he ended up going to Temple. And it is a guy that, what did he play? 12 years in the league. He spent a lot of time with the Knicks. He was Van Gundy's like right-hand man. He didn't play a lot in the NBA, but he made a lot of teams. I'd say, Brunson, you cashed a lot of checks. And he was undrafted out of Temple. But another guy who was a McDonald's All-American, he came out the same year as Travis Best. Travis Best didn't play for us. He was from Springfield, but he was a big-time McDonald's All-American as well. And he played for a team called Connecticut Select, because Springfield's more out that way. But Travis became a good friend. And Brunson's, and look at the legacy with his son. I used to kid because his son grew up in Illinois, because he had worked with the Bulls and this and that after playing. And I say, Brunson, he belongs here with us. He should be in the black and gold. And we talked about it, but of course with the rules, he wasn't a resident from up here, so that wasn't possible,
Right. So there's supposed to be some type of rules where you have to live in a certain area in a certain amount.
AAU, Nike, any NCAA event, you have to be within the state of your residence, and you're allowed 3 extra guys from bordering states. Wow. That wasn't the case back in the 70s. It was funny when we would beat Riverside once in a while. They would go out and get like some guy from Florida or whatever, and then we go down to New York and play. All of a sudden we beat. Now they got this pro playing. Back then there wasn't the case, but once things started getting more and more formal and organized, like right now, for any of us, PSA, Cardinals, anybody like that, we're only allowed in-state players in 3 bordering states. So you can have, the New York team could have 3 kids from Jersey or Connecticut or what have you, Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. Right. But that's been in effect for about 20 years now. Your roster has to reflect in-state and 3 bordering states. Now that you could have a tournament that's not certified, that's not under AU rules or Nike rules or USA basketball rules or not an NCAA certified tournament where their coaches can come. You can do what you want outside that. That's kind of called like renegade ball. But like the way it is now, most of the guys wouldn't do that, because that means you'd be displacing one of your native kids. But that's been the rule, I want to say, since late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah. That's weird. I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the Boston shootout. So how was it, to being able to play in the old Garden? Like, because you said that you played there in high school. How was it coaching in there?
Well, the shootout started in 72. That was the year after I graduated. And I don't think they got in the Garden, and it was the old Garden, which closed in 95. I'd say they were there for the championship round in 90, 91, 92, 93, the last 3 or 4 years before the Garden closed. It mostly was at BU. But again, it was a senior-based tournament. There were 8 teams. The core teams were always Boston, New York, Atlanta, and Chicago. Then they'd go get 4 more. So everybody played 3 games, one game a day, single elimination. If you lost the first night, you went to the consolation round. It was magical because, again, you didn't have the TV like you have today with high school games. So you'd see these guys. Again, it was June, and the NCAA rule at the time was kids could only play in 2 all-star games until they graduated. So they would always plug in the tournament for late June after everybody had graduated, because they were considered all-star games. And if you were going to play in that tournament, you were obligated to play in 3 games, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. it was great. You know, it started in 72. You know, we rep BABC. They used to have tryouts for the Boston team, but we had got a little bit of juice. So in 80, I mentioned the 80, 81, 82 teams. They put BABC in it as a whole, repping Boston, and Riverside repping New York. But you know, that was ahead of its time, because it you know, you had guys, again, I don't know, hundreds of pros come out of that thing, because what they would do for the other 4 teams, they try to figure out, okay, you know, we got our Boston, our Atlanta, our Chicago, and our New York. Let's go get the 4 other teams based on who's ever got like the talent that year. And they had great sponsorship. A guy named Kenny Hudson, who was an NBA referee, worked for Coca-Cola. Ron Burton Sr. worked for John Hancock. They were great community leaders in the urban community in Boston. Alfreda Harris at the Shelburne Center. They would pay for teams to get in. Say we call you up and you say, my man, you're going to run New York this year. They'd send you plane tickets, and when you got here, someone pick you up. They put you in a first-class hotel. They fed you. It didn't cost you a dime. So who would say no to that? Yeah, because they had great sponsorship, and that would sell out. You know, they started in the gym at BU, the old gym, which held about, 1,200, and then they went to the new gym at BU. They held about 2,500, and then it got to the point like the game I described in 82 against Riverside. They went to the hockey rink downstairs, which held 4,500, and you couldn't get in. You couldn't get in. Of course, when Boston played, people will go berserk, you know. So that was a big part of the basketball culture here, because again, and we would they kind of relied on us. Even if we weren't in it, the core of the Boston team would be 7, 8, or 9 of the kids out of the 10 would be BABC kids, you know, to represent the city, because we had the experience of going on the road and playing against a lot of these teams. So, you know, our kids were kind of used to it. They wouldn't get shocked when all of a sudden a team with LA would come in with like 5 future pros. Our guys, you know, they've been there, done that. So they were the core of it. But we represent that. The shootout ended in, the boys club ended in 98, and we pick it up. We bought the name, you know, from the boys clubs, you know, the copyright. And we've run the Boston shootout version ever since 98. We didn't have it this past year, the pandemic, but we get regional teams like, you know, Riverside, the new Riverside Church will come up, or a couple of times the New York Jayhawks came up, the Lightnings come up. We do it for just 9th and 10th graders, you know, just 6 teams on a regional basis. We do it at Cathedral High School, but we keep the name going. It's always the first weekend in June. Hopefully this year, pandemic's back, and we'll be back at Cathedral High School the first week in June. And it's fun. You know, it's one game at a time. See, that's the big thing I can't impress enough. Like a lot of times, you go to EYBL, there's 6 games going on at once. You know, like back then there was one game. When you rented a gym, you didn't rent no cross courts, no intramural courts. Every game was on the main court with the bleachers pulled out and fans. It was one game at a time. So most of the tournaments you'd be in that era had eight teams in it, 4 games a day. You know, the traditional, you play your 4 games, 2 winners go to semis, 2 losers go to consolation. So that's the shootout was the pioneer in that era, starting in 72, right through the 80s, and you know, continuing on. And then, you know, this was like open the floodgates. People started having tournaments with, you know, 16 teams, 32 teams, 64 teams. And you know, you couldn't do that all on one court. So you got to get a gym now where you're playing on cross courts or side courts. To me, if I had my way, everything would be like it was then. You know, just I kind of live in the past maybe, but being on that main court for the kids with the bleachers pulled out, one game at a time, that game was the focus of all the media, all the scouts, all the college people, and more importantly, we get fans. Like when we run, so it was, back then we played a home game in Boston, we could get 1,000, 1,500 people, because it would be hyped in the newspapers. You know, New York's coming in and they got this guy and that guy, or DC's coming in, or Philly's coming in. You know, don't forget, in the Northeast corridor, we had, you know, we always consider the best basketball, New York being the king, but, you know, Philly, DC, you know, Jersey being damn close. And then we were kind of like the little brothers, smaller city, you know, but we earned our respect, you know, in the 70s and 80s, because you go on the road and you win. You know, like that's the only way to do it. Just like boxing, you want to win, you got to go out and take it from them. So because of all the soldiers and warriors we had in that era, you know, some of my favorite teams, our favorite teams, you know, we were able to get in that conversation. And the conversation was with guys like Howard Garfinkel and Tom Kachowski. They had the HSBI, the scout. That was the only scouting report around. Once they said, boy, there's players in Boston, that's all they had to say. It was like you were baptized and you were on the map, you know, and that's where we were in the early days of the shootout in the 70s and 80s. Now, to me, it seems like yesterday. If any young kids are listening, they're probably thinking, man, oh, man, this dude's from 200 years ago. What's he talking about? But, you know, we're talking about a lot of pros, and we're talking about phenomenal competition. Don't forget, we were playing for T-shirts and trophies. That's it. It wasn't like someone's going to be giving you some reward, or someone's going to pay you off. You were hoping to get a meal, a happy meal, and get home. You know, like, and you go home with that trophy. You go home with that T-shirt that says we won the Brooklyn Flatbush Invitational, or we won the Brooklyn Green Bright, or whatever it was. You know what I mean? It was that was, you wore that T-shirt around. People say, man, oh man, you went down to New York and you won. So and so play. Oh yeah, he played. Albert King. Yeah, he played. You guys beat him. Oh yeah, we beat him. Like, you know, and that would put you on the map. That would give you made your bones. You gave it respect. So that's what kind of we were all about in that era. We were kind of waving the flag for Boston. People kind of say, come on now, Boston, you're going to get your ass beat coming to New York. But we didn't. You know, we had great guys that would compete on the difficult circumstances, like piling a Cadillac, sleeping in one room. You know, I paid for everything myself, and I wasn't a rich guy back then. You know, I had just whatever I had in my pocket, you know, and you know, these kids didn't have much, like, you know, and it was just about love of the game and repping your home city. That's what it was. That was purely what it was all about. It wasn't about no exposure. Like the NCAA really didn't have recruiting periods back then. If coach wanted to come, he'd just come. You know, they didn't have like July and like they have, and rules for this and that. You know, St. John, if St. John's hears that BABC's playing in Riverside, Karen Secker and them would be there, Ronnie Rutledge, Brian Mahoney, all those guys, you know, because they just want to check it out. They'd be in the park watching. They didn't have to, you know, register, all that stuff like they do now. And things were a lot, again, less easier, formal. But to me, if I had a choice, that's the world I really enjoyed living in. Not that I dislike it now because it's gotten so big. There has to be structure. But back then, like again, I'm calling you up and you say, okay, what time you guys want to play? 2:00. You're going on my word. What if I oversleep? I don't have gas money. You look like a fool. I don't show up. You're in the park with all the New York, Brooklyn kids. It was your reputation, your word. You said, no, I know Leo. He'll be here. 5 minutes or two, we'd pull up, jump out the car, and let's go. Let's ball. You know, and it'd be a crowd, whether it be indoors or outdoors. Things were based on your reputation as a man and your ability to show. You didn't tell stories. Now, once in a while, you'd come across a guy that would tell you he's coming and he didn't come. You might as well shoot yourself in basketball because your rep got out. The guy's he's a four-flusher. He's a fraud. He left me up here one time. Someone go, well, what happened with so-and-so? He didn't come. Guy from D.C. would call me. It's all I got to know, brother. I ain't inviting him here. I can't get made a fool out of like that. You know, so it was your word and your rep. You know what I mean? It wasn't like you sent an entry fee and you registered and you did all this stuff online. Like I said, I'd pick up the guys in the caddy in the morning. We drive to New York and we go play. And that was that.
So another talented player that you had in the 90s was the late Jamal Jackson.
Yeah, that still haunts me to this day, losing him. You know, it was tell you funny, that was the summer of 95. We lost him. He was the class of 93. He was what they call a prop. He didn't quite have the credits to back then. It was a little different to qualify, and he sat out and he played his sophomore year at Cleveland State. And even at his funeral, Charlie Oakley, Chris Mills, the Cavs were very, very good. They came to the funeral and they told me, Coach, you know, this guy was playing with us all summer. He was ready to go and do some damage in the NBA, you know, and he got involved in an altercation and got stabbed to death in August of 95. You know, I bought him his plane ticket to go back to Cleveland on the morning that he died. His flight was at 6 and he died at about 4:45. He got stabbed about 4:30. And he been in an altercation over a woman, and he got stabbed, and he didn't make it. I remember I thought I'd been with him the night before we left. We had to play in Philly on a Thursday. He died on a Friday morning at dawn, and Wednesday night I was with him. We were working out. I said we're going to Philly, and he said I'd love to come, but I got to get back to school. I got to do a couple things. So I got on the plane ticket for that morning. We never got on the flight. Jamal Jackson was Scottie Pippen, maybe. You know, he would have been an NBA All-Star because, you know, his tenaciousness. You know, at 6'6", he was like, I guess you'd call him a stretch 4, but I've been around ferocious rebounders. He was a ferocious traffic rebounder. You know, we always kept stats. I always had someone, usually a girlfriend, somebody keeping stats on the bench. In big games, he was a 20 rebound guy. He just had his desire to get on the glass and to compete. He was as tough as they come. He would have been an NBA All-Star. And beyond that, he was one of the greatest guys. He had the charisma of Muhammad Ali, handsome kid, and you know, everywhere we went, the girls would be, look at that guy, and you know, 6'6", and just I get emotional now. He almost, you know, we lost him 26 years ago. It was tough. You know, that's a tough one.
Rest in peace, Jamal Jackson.
Yes.
Yeah, man, that was terrible. Like I remember my guy Joe Almeida. Shout outs to him.
Joe's a historian. Joe has done a great job chronicling. In fact, my daughter, you know, is relying on Joe. We're going to have you on. We're going to flip. You know, we bought a Schlade's Bar and Grill in Roxbury a few years ago. Bill Russell owned it. It's kind of like the place in the hood. You know, it's food and all that, and legendary. And my daughter runs it. We're going to do a sports podcast, and she says we got to get Joe on there because Joe got everything. He got all the programs. He even as a young kid, he would come to our games in the 90s. Joe's a good man. He should be an NBA player personnel director. He knows the game.
Yeah,
but
he does.
If he tells you something about a player, put it in the book. Put it in the book because Joe knows. They say Bo knows, Joe knows.
You know, yeah. So basically, he was how I found out about Jamal. And right now, as we speak, I'm looking at the archives. Newspapers.com. $72 for 6 months. Great site. But yeah,
you know something? I got it. I got it.
Do?
Yeah, I got it for a Christmas present. Yeah, you know, because then I go back a little deeper into the 60s and even high school kids before me and look it up. I get chills, man. Isn't that great? Yeah.
I find a lot of stuff, you know, a lot of high school articles. Just the other day, I interviewed Jeff McInnes. Shout outs to him. He's doing a wonderful job at Combine Academy in Lincolnton, North Carolina.
Yeah, he had a travel team, club team,
Charlotte.
He
still has Team
played
Charlotte.
him a couple of years ago for the AAU when AAU's kind of taking a step back. But back when all the powerhouses would go down to, you know, Disney, we played him, I think, for the 16 Nationals a couple of years in a row, and he did a hell of a job, man. He can coach. He was a hard-nosed player. When I was at Celtics, when he was playing, I was director of player personnel, so I was in charge of, and we tried to get him a couple of times with the Celtics. He was with different teams. He was a damn good college player and a damn good pro, hard-nosed.
Well said, man. And you guys had another very, very, very talented. Oh, this segues into the question of the famed 1992 team. You guys had an amazing squad that year. Talk about that year.
I'll tell you what, that group, Jamal was part of that, you know, because Jamal went to East Boston High School, but he had to do a 5th year at Newman Prep. They didn't have basketball at Newman Prep. It was a little academics to get ready to go to college academically, you know. And Jamal was on that team, and that was the first year of the Charlie Weber tournament down the University of Maryland, where they were bringing in teams from all over the country in September. Back then, September was considered a live period for the NCAA guys, and right in Cole Fieldhouse, same deal, one team at a time. Like there were 12 teams, and we went down there and won that. And honestly, anybody who was there, I still got the tapes to it, and you know, they were the old not before DVDs, just the tapes. My daughter just had them converted. You watched the tapes, Jamal, in that tournament. We romped through that tournament, and Jamal was MVP. And you know, that that 92 team, that's what kind of put that team on the map, winning that Charlie Weber. We won everything else there was to win. We actually played up in the AAU 19 and under. Most of them were juniors, and we won that too. We beat the Jersey Roadrunners in the final in '92, and with guys that had another year. So we actually were the best team in the country, both 17 and 19, playing with mostly 17s. And Jamal was he was our Jordan, he was our LeBron. That really he this guy could do that type of work. And I'll tell you what, he did not like to lose, and he was just, he'd fight, whatever you got to do to win. His heart, and he got stabbed in the heart, sadly, but his heart was, it was the biggest one I ever been around in sports.
Oh yeah, so yeah, what I was about to get into, you had another very, very talented player out of Durfee High School.
Yeah,
he
was a sophomore on that team.
Chris
He was the
Herren.
class of '94, and he was our sixth man. He was 15. He was our sixth man, and boy, he could go. Chris Herren. You got to understand the whole culture out of Fall River. Fall River is next to Providence, about 40 miles south of Boston, next to New Bedford, and that's a great basketball. Providence, Fall River, New Bedford, high school wise, and in fact, going back to the North Quincy days, my CYO guys, they used to have a big Easter CYO tournament down there in Fall River. We used to hitchhike down there on school nights in the dark just to play in Fall River, because Fall River had a basketball. It was like one of those Indiana towns, if you know what I mean. Like the whole basketball was it. And Chris's dad, I actually played against Chris's dad in the Garden in the tech tourney. And then his older brother was a player. So I kind of knew the dad, and he sent Chris to us after his freshman year. And we, again, there was not 15 us. He played with the big boys as a sophomore. And that national championship team in '92, he was part of that. The Charlie Weber team in '92 was a sophomore. He was part of that. And he was special. He was special.
Yeah, man. Like, I love Chris's story, because it was it was a groundbreaking one. Like, I saw the documentary, the 30 for 30 on ESPN.
Yeah, I was in that actually. I was part of.
I remember that.
Yeah.
The situation with the drugs, that was very sad.
Well, look what he's done with his life now. He got a clinic. He has a hospital where people can go and turn their lives around and rehab. He dedicated his life now to addiction and fighting addiction as a medical issue, not a social issue. And he has a wellness center. People go and get clean, turn their lives around. That's pretty much what he's decided to do with his life, and he's very successful at it. So he deserves great credit for that.
Yeah, man.
But let me tell you something. He was a McDonald's All-American. I think he won the McDonald's game was at St. John's that year. I think he won the dunk contest. I mean, he was about 6'3". I mean, he could go. He could go. He could go. He had NBA All-Star ability.
Why do you think that his career didn't last so long?
Well, if you look at his story, and you not to put words in his mouth, but he was an addict. You're doing heroin playing in the NBA. That's not the easiest. We had him with the Celtics, for a season, and he actually had a pretty good season. That was his last year in the NBA. It would have been right after the year Patino left in 99. Jim O'Brien took over. We made a playoff run. The next year we went to the Eastern Conference Finals. He went over to Europe, but he kept it secret. He kept it on the DL too, but he was doing pills and heroin, and he was still playing in the league. He had a 20-point quarter against the Wizards one night. We were trying to make a playoff run in 01. And the next year, of course, I said went to the conference finals, but against the Sixers, who had been in the NBA finals, and beat them. And we went to the conference finals, lost to the Nets in a memorable 7-game series. But if again, not putting words in his mouth, but he said, and you watched the documentary on 30 for 30. It's called Unguarded. Jonathan Hawk, another New Yorker, did it. And Chris, he was an addict. He OD'd a couple of times, and God decided it wasn't time for him to go, and he lived through it. And here he is today with a great family man, great community man, and got a great business that does nothing but helps people beat that sickness. How many guys, not in sport, I mean, that addiction, I think for both of us, all of us in our neighborhoods, how many guys we knew we grew up with that got that sickness. And, it's just like getting pneumonia or cancer. It's a sickness. It's a medical issue. And, Chris had that issue. So to answer your question, he was an addict. And that's not my opinion. That's what he said. And that's what he was diagnosed at. And you saw those emotional speeches he would make. He tells you about what it did to him, Yeah,
I got to get Chris on there. I definitely got to get Chris on.
Yeah, I think he'd be great.
Yeah. So that following year, 1995, you had two other All-American players, Scoonie Penn and Wayne Turner. Talk about.
And the one more. Penn was 94. 95 was Randall Jackson was a McDonald's All-American, and Wayne Turner. We had two guys in the McDonald's game.
Oh.
Yeah, Penn was a sophomore then. Penn was 94. Penn was in college. Penn was the class of 94. No, Penn was 95. You're right, but he wasn't a McDonald's All-American, but he was 95 too. Yeah. We played a great Riverside team in the national championship game, and we had 90 points in the first half.
Ooh.
That was Felipe Lopez. Yeah, it was a 20-minute half.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was that team was special. Penn, Wayne Turner, Pat Bradley scored 2,000 points at Arkansas. Randall Jackson was a McDonald's All-American, played in the NBA, played at Florida State. We were really good. I don't often say that. I mean, we're unbeatable, that team.
Amazing. So let's talk about your time with the Celtics. Like, when did you first become a scout for the Celtics? You said 97?
Well, I was never a scout. I was actually director of scouting, director of player personnel, and then I became what they call executive director of basketball, senior executive director. And the day we got hired together, myself, Rick Pitino, Rick was president and head coach. Jim O'Brien from St. Joe's, who became a long time, not Jim O'Brien from BC. He's a New Yorker. Jim O'Brien from St. Joe's was the assistant, and I was named director of scouting. And on May 6, 97, with the new Pitino administration, and I stayed there right through 2012. They didn't last. Rick resigned. Obi came in, did a great job, went to Eastern Conference Finals. So I was in Boston for 16 years. I started as director of scouting, then they changed my title to director of player personnel, and in the last 8 years or so, I was senior executive director of basketball. I was the number 2 guy. We didn't have any scouts back then. The ownership at the time just thought that the guys that work full time should take care of the scouting. A lot of teams do it like baseball did, and they hire regional scouts. We didn't do that. So basically, then Chris Wallace came aboard as general manager, and basically he and I did all the scouting, even though we had other duties, trades, draft. It was just the two of us. We were the entire front office. We absorbed the role of scouts in terms of going to high school, college, CBA, pro in Europe. So back then, I was gone 200 days a year minimum. I'd be in Moscow one day, Beijing the next day, University of Kansas the next day. I mean, we didn't, like I said, I did scouting, but we worked out of the office, and it was just the two of us, from 97 right through about 2004. The new owners came in, and Ainge was a great addition. He came in overseeing the office, he was the senior executive director of basketball, and Chris. So there were 3 of us, and then Chris left to take over Memphis. I had an opportunity to go there with Memphis, to run the team with him. But Boston, I was under contract to Boston, and they were nice enough to extend my contract and give me a raise. So I stayed with Boston. Chris went on. So it was just Ainge and I, for a few years, just the two of us. Again, he had the title, but he was the same deal. He'd be in Madison Square Garden one night and in Russia the next night. We were doing the scouting among our other responsibilities. There was no guys like above us back in the office. We ran the basketball operation. I was the number 2 guy there for, a good 16 years.
Wow.
We just didn't adhere to the scouting. Some teams did. They hired like part-time scouts, and I actually do in my old age. Now I've been doing that for the Clippers the last 5 years. I limit. This year nobody's going to games, so they don't let you. But I normal winters since I retired from Boston in 2012. I spend the winters in Miami. This year with the COVID, I don't. But I cover some territory for the Clippers. But that's in a scouting consultant type basis where you just you're working out of your house. But in Boston, it was full-time employee. Like I said, it wasn't just scouting. Scouting was actually the fun part, because especially if your team ain't going good, you don't want to be hanging around with the owners saying what's wrong with the team, it's your fault, this and that. So the old saying, if you lose, you go scouting. But I would go on the road sometimes 2-3 weeks in the wintertime. I'd see an NBA game one night because we had to cover that too. We didn't have an NBA scout. We didn't have a college scout. We just covered territory for basketball. And back then you could go to high school games. Mm-hmm. So it was just, that's what it was. So I had 16 good years in Boston. It was a pleasure. Unusual to work in your hometown. It was coincidental. But when Pitino came in, I had known him a little bit. And he said, you want to take care of the scouting for us. I was a one-man department, really, for the first few years. And basically, they just changed the title because you go and get an agent, and when you change the title, you get a couple more dollars. A lot of times the scouting stuff is part-time, but for us, it was full-time, 365 days a year. You were running the team. You were answerable to the owners.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So for 15 years, you saw a lot. You saw a lot of the losing. You saw them win an NBA championship.
Yeah, we went to the Eastern Conference Finals in 2002 and NBA championship in 2008, and could have had one in 2010. Remember, we were in the locker room in LA in Game 7. We were 9 minutes to go. We're up 11, and Kendrick Perkins had blown out his knee the night before in Game 6. They beat us in a close one. We were up 3-2 going out there. We had this one locked. Rasheed Wallace had taken big minutes because Perkins was out. Rasheed hadn't played big minutes all year, and Gasol got on the offensive glass. They tied it. I tested a big bank shot 3 to tie it with about 2 minutes to go, and I had my car, and I said, I got to get out of here, man. I listened to the last 2 minutes on the radio driving back to Santa Monica where my hotel was, because I said, boy, we're out of gas. And I had to rent a car. And I said, when people win championships, they're going to stop burning cars, and I'll be responsible. So, 2010 was a heartbreaker. That should have been another ring. If could have, should have, would have. But Perk don't blow out his knee, because he was a horse in the middle. He could keep Gasol off the glass, and they just kept coming to the glass. Second shots, like I said, I think we were up 11. Garnett hit a big shot at the 9-minute timeout. Up 11 with 9 to go, and that team didn't fold too much. It's just that we got worn out. A couple of bigs had 5 fouls. If Perk is breathing, we win that one.
Yeah. Did you get a ring for working?
Oh yeah. I get that ring. Wow. It's sitting right around here somewhere. I'm up in my home office in my house, so the ring's right around here somewhere.
Wow, that's big right there. So you got how did you feel? Let's backtrack some time. How did you feel, when the old Boston Garden closed down for good?
95. I was at the last game there. Celtics
with the
played
Magic.
Orlando in the playoffs in 95.
Wow.
The last basketball game before they knocked it down that summer. I was probably in that place, I don't know, 500 times. It was it's like a piece of you went away. You watch the Russell era, you watch the Collins era, the Bird era. You had some real games, and I went all the time. It was just I just went. Getting a ticket was no big deal. So how I felt, like it was like part of history. I wish it was still there.
You guys got the TD Garden, so it's a nice place. Like the last time I was in Mass, I actually went to Dana's facility, for an event, because I know one of my guys from Mass Rivals was holding an event over there. It was a little camp.
Tom Nelson.
Yeah, shout out to my man Tom Nelson.
Tom's a good man. He does a great job at Perimeter May. Played for Holy Cross. He's a good people.
Indeed, man. So on my way back to the bus terminal at South Station, I stopped by the Boston Garden. It looks nice on the outside with that statue of Red Auerbach outside the arena. I wish I could go in there someday. I would love to. That's my plan.
I wish I could take you back in time to the old garden. No disrespect to the current one, because that was the shrine. That was the temple.
Yeah,
don't forget the franchise has won 17 championships. 16 of them were in the old garden.
Mm-hmm. But I heard it was super humid in the old garden.
Oh, it was there. Oh, that was part of the mystique. That was part of the mystique. It was a tough place to play, and that's how pro sports were. And then you did what you had to do to win. Maybe they turned the heat up. Who knows? Only Red knows. And one of the things is my first 5 years with Boston. Red was still active as team president. He lived in D.C. and we got really, really close. And whenever I would go to D.C., he'd say, "You fucking call me. You better call." And when I'd call, so we'd go. Red loved only one thing more than the Celtics: GW. He went to school there, and we would go to games at GW or Georgetown. Of course, Coach Thompson, grew up in D.C. and he actually played 1 year in the NBA for the Celtics. So he was like a godson of Red. So Red was D.C. basketball. You don't realize that his entire 40 plus years in Boston, he lived in D.C. the whole time. He'd get a hotel room in Boston. He used to trade tickets. He left his family in D.C. So when I got the orders from Red, when I come to his first couple of years, in fact, I'll tell you a great story. 97, that first summer that we get with Boston, I get to know him. And he says, "What's this BABC, this AAU? You ever play in D.C.?" And I says, "As a matter of fact, we're playing down at Georgetown in that wasn't the Urban Coalition. Another guy had a summer program. I said, he's having an end of the summer in August at Georgetown." He says, "You call me." So I call him. It's like July 31 or so. Wife answers the phone. She said, "Yeah, he's waiting for you. He's playing cards over the club. He just want to know what time the game was. I'll call him." He shows up. No, now I said, "Coach, you got to sit on the bench." So he sits on the bench during the game. We won, and now we're playing again at 9 at night. He says, "I got to get home." He's in his 80s. My wife gets nervous. He's driving that Mercedes. He says, "She don't like me driving at night." I said, "Coach, before you go, you gotta talk to my guys." He says, "Come on now." He says, "I could be their great grandfather. They don't know who I am." I says, "Coach, trust me. So he says, right away, this is his great people skills. He says, "When I was you guys' age, I had something like this, was called the Penguins. We were in Brooklyn," he said, "and we played football in the fall, basketball in the winter, and baseball in the spring." He said, "We didn't have 10 cents between us. Our parents all were hardworking immigrant folks, didn't have money to give us. So basically, we had to get money for uniforms, for ball, for equipment, and gyms." He said, "I knew back then the way to raise money was wherever the girls were, the guys would go." So he would have dances on Saturday nights all over Brooklyn, CYO halls, Jewish community centers, all kinds of church. Most churches had little gyms, and they might have just. So he would rent out every Saturday night a gym and have a dance. And he said, "Girls go for free, guys go for 10 cents. She said he was doing it for a year or so, and they'd be bringing in money, but they'd have to pay, a cop. They'd have to pay for the gym, and they were just barely breaking even. So he said, "I figured out one thing. If I could get away with not paying that band, I could keep that money." They're talking maybe like $50. He said, so every night they had to close at 12. I guess those were the rules in Brooklyn for kids having dances back. You're talking the 1930s now, right? He'd say one of his boys would come into the place like a madman. "Where's Auerbach? Where's Auerbach? That son of a bitch owes me money." The guy would throw a punch at him. I'd fall down. Everybody would start screaming. Everybody would run out the door, including the band. But it was all a scam. He said that way there, the band was afraid to get paid. And he said, "I'd keep that money, and the Penguins were good." So he said years and years later, he used to do the Miller Lite beer commercials. There was a guy named Alan King who was like a big comedian in Las Vegas. He was a Brooklyn guy. And he was the dude who ran the bands. So he said, this is probably in the 60s now, like, 30, 40 years later, maybe the 70s. King confronts Red and says, "You son of a bitch, Red, all that stuff was a scam. You chased all my poor band guys were terrified. You never paid them, And Red said, "I told him, get out of here, man." But that's just, now you're a kid. You hear a guy, a legend, a Hall of Famer, right away, he gets in their hearts and their souls. Those kids relate to that.
Yeah.
Because he was one of them. And the kids that heard that story, they still talk about it. The best part is we were playing Baltimore that night in the quarterfinals. He said, "They're going to be tough." I says, "Yeah." He says, "You call me as soon as the game's over." It's a 9 p.m. game, so about 11 o'clock. He answers in one ring. He says one thing: "Did we win?" I said, "Yeah." Second question: "What time tomorrow?" I said, 9 a.m. He says, "I'll bring the donuts." He showed up 8:30 with donuts. Now, you think about a guy of his achievements, kind of was responsible for the life of the NBA, it's fair to say. He's in his last years. He's in his 80s with a bunch of, urban kids from Boston and me, a guy that, basically working for his team, like as director of scouting. I know him a few months. I'd gone to his camp as a kid, and I remember that. Tremendous memory. But the bonding, that told me why he won all those years, because people believed in him and wanted to win for him. Now, and people don't forget, I think he went to Erasmus Hall. He's a Brooklyn native. People, and then he went to GW, and he left to go in the Navy and went back to GW, finished up, and he coached high school ball in DC at St. Stephen's or one of those in the DC private league. He was at DC as a high school, St. Albans, a distinguished school. And when I one time I picked him up, we were riding around. He says, "Come on, pull over here." We pull up in St. Albans. He says, "Let me take you in here." And they had, like a lot of high schools, they have a trophy case, and 19, whatever it was, 40 right after the war, city champions. He had a little tear in his eye. He says, "I did what you do." There's a guy that was a king. Celtics all those years putting those championship teams together. Don't forget, not just the Russell era with 11 championships, and the Collins Havlicek era 2 more, then the Bird and Parrish and McHale 3 more. The guy was around for 16 championships. And the fact that he would get emotional about his days in Brooklyn, his days as a high school coach, his days at GW, and right to the end, he went to every GW home game. The first couple of years when I would fly in, he was still driving. He'd pick me up at Reagan Airport. He'd say, "Come in the morning." We go all over DC all day. He'd go shopping, talk to this guy, talk to that guy, go eat again, go in the game at 7 o'clock, go in the game at 5 o'clock, talk to the coaches. It was really a phenomenal deal. And what my daughter Brittany, who runs our program, I think was in the 8th grade. This was the year right before he passed. And this is a great story. Frank Vogel, who's now the coach of the Lakers, was the film guy for the Celtics. He basically was like Pitino and Jim O'Brien's babysitter. He was a manager at Kentucky. So when they came to the Celtics, they brought him as their film guy. Now Frank's an NBA championship coach. Frank had hurt his knee just fooling around in the Celtic gym one day, and he had ACL surgery. So we were doing a draft workout. And Red used to come to the workouts. He used to fly up because we do it so he can come up for a weekend. We work out guys for the draft. So right before the workout, Frank just got back on the court, and my daughter was in 8th grade. So all the coaches, Lester Connor and Jim O'Brien, they were teasing Frank. "Come on, Frank, we got a little girl here that's going to beat you." Red was getting old, so he took a little snooze. He's sitting in a chair. So they played a 7, and Brittany hits a shot and wins 7-6. And all the coaches start yelling and screaming. Red's asleep. He wakes up. He says, "What the fuck just happened?" So they said, "Red, you're not going to believe this. A little girl just beat a guy who played for Kentucky." Frank had been Kentucky had a JV team. Then he became manager. Red said, "You kidding me? Who's the girl?" He said, "Leo's kid." The next day, my daughter's in 8th grade. She got a letter in the mail offering a scholarship to George Washington, because Red called the GW girls coach and said, "I don't know, but this little girl beat a guy from Kentucky. She's got to be pretty good. I didn't see it, but that was priceless. And when he wrote his last memoir, let me tell you a story. Right year before he died, Christmas Eve, we got a FedEx. The guy rang the bell. It's a book, and it was mailed out to my daughter and said, "Wishing you the best from Red." She used to call him the man with the cigars. She used to sit in the Celtic locker room because a lot of times he was old. He'd get tired. He'd go to take a snooze in the locker room. And she'd come home and tell my wife, his mother, Brittany's mom, she'd be like 8, 9 years old. My earlier Celtics said, "I met this man today. He smoked cigars, and he was telling me about basketball and telling me what a point guard's supposed to do." So that gives you an indication of the character of Red Auerbach. Nothing was too big for him, and nothing was too small for him, including me, and nobody director of scouting, my daughter, a little kid. If you were in the game, he looked out for you. That's why he had great success. That's why he won so much, because guys would die to win for him because he was that invested as a human being. And like I said, he kept his family in D.C. They didn't make big deal. He stayed in the Lenox Hotel. He'd rent a room, and rather than pay rent, he would give the guy tickets to come to the games. That's how all in he was all these years. He never bought a home in Boston. That's why all his ex-players, all those Hall of Famers, this guy had a special gift for not just evaluating talent, for evaluating people. Bill Russell, the greatest winner of all time, a champion in the civil rights movement. Bill Russell, a man of immense character. Red went with him. Bill Russell, he was a dominant college player, but he couldn't score. A lot of guys said, well, he can't shoot. He can't. Red saw it differently. His defensive, prowess changed the game. 11 championships in 13 years. And people forget that in 58, he broke his ankle and they lost to St. Louis in 6. It would have been 12 out of 13 years if you don't break that ankle. That was Red's genius, was relationships with people. So I'm just giving you some personal, like there were, he coached Hall of Famers. I'm a guy that was a ham and egg semi-pro player. I wasn't a Celtic, but he still found enough compassion, time to devote time to me and my little girl at the time. So that's Red Auerbach. That's a champion of people and of character and relationships. And that's kind of what we try to do in our end of basketball. A lot of guys look at it for the coin. I done okay outside of basketball with coins. So, I look at basketball as a sport and the competition part. It's not just about pimping the game. And I think there are, there are people today that do that. You know what I mean? In all aspects, it's about the coin. But if that's what it's about, you're never going to leave the game happy. You leave the game happy like Red left the game happy because of the relationships he had, and the winning that he gave birth to, So, I get a little emotional talking about him. And again, he had a lot of guys that could really play way far ahead of the line than me. And I was like, small potatoes, but you can tell by the tone of this conversation and the emotion in my voice what that guy meant.
Rest in peace, Red Auerbach. You have so many stories about him,
and they're all true.
So yeah, what I wanted to ask was, through all those years with the Celtics, how were you able to still operate BABC?
Well, here's what happened. When I first got hired, I said, I'm not quitting. And if it's anything illegal, then I'm not going to take the job, because I had other things going on. I got real estate and this and that. I said, BABC is more important to me than an NBA. I told that to Patino. And so I started doing it. After about 3 or 4 years, they used to send me to the competition committee meetings for the Celtics. And the competition committee's got a couple of owners, a couple of GMs. They talk about rule changes. So somebody said, geez, Leo, would you leave the room? We got an issue. And they said, nothing personal. Technically, the league rule about interaction with players that were not yet draft eligible violated the league rule about contact. Because, basically, if you're in the NBA, the only guy you could really talk to is a college senior. Until a guy declares for the draft, he's off limits. to interview, to talk to. You can't even comment publicly in the press. So I said, okay. And they sent back a notification to our team. We had new owners, and they all panicked. We got to take a look at this. From what I was told was Isaiah was in the meeting. He was, of course, around the Knicks then. And he said, you guys got to be kidding me. You want to bother this guy for this, for coaching kids? So Commissioner Stern, God rest his soul, and he could be tough. Team lawyer, Neil Jacobs, who had a good relationship with Stern, said, I'm going to, sit out for a while. And this would have been about 2005, I want to say, 2006. Yeah, right around there. He said, I'm going to take it up with David and legally if I have to. So Neil talked to the commissioner, and Stern said, how long has he been doing it, this and that? And I said, really, when I'm coaching BABC, I really don't give a shit about the NBA at that moment when I'm coaching our kids. It's about our kids trying to be the best we can be. There's no scam where I'm trying to scout guys or evaluate guys. I'm laser focused on my team, my kids, our team. So basically they went back and forth, and Commissioner Stern was a tough guy, but a very fair guy, sent a memo out to all 30 teams saying that if you have anybody that is involved with amateur basketball, come forward now. We're considering making a rule, our legal department. So they created a rule that said, number one, had to be in existence for at least, I think, 20 years. You had to have done it before you went to the league, had to be a nonprofit, and it had to be in your hometown. Not necessarily, because that meant I had to do it in Boston. If I went to work for the Clippers or the Lakers, I couldn't do a team in LA. So basically, Commissioner Stern grandfathered me in, and in writing and all that stuff. And I was fortunate enough to be able to do that, wow. and it was on the up and up. And Commissioner was, like I said, he was the new owners were a little scared, saying, "What did you do?" I said, "Well, I didn't do nothing." But the commissioner's going to be fair. He wasn't going to penalize, but they wanted to address it because a couple of teams were crying about it, saying, "Oh, if he can do that, why can't we do it?" And so he put it out there. You got a guy, come forward. Let me see the resume. Let me see the conditions that he's operating under, and I'll make a ruling. And in the NBA, the commissioner he's God. Whatever the commissioner says goes. And the guys in the legal department got with our lawyer, and they came up with criteria. And basically, the truth was, if I thought, like I said, well, you've seen us play, you've seen our style. You really think that I'm fronting coaching BABC to do something with him? No, that day, that BABC practice, I got my job's to take care of our kids. NBA, no NBA, that ain't on my mind right now. That might as well be NHL or NFL or Major League Baseball. So I was able to separate it and continue to do it today. This is season 44. Season 70. This will be season 45 for us, BABC. Wow. So had it come to a point, and I was making good dough with Boston. If they said you can't do it no more, I would have left the Celtics and stay with BABC. Wow.
Now, today you guys have a few NBA players. Georgia
6 this year. We've had eight 2 years ago, 7 last year, 6 this year. 25 total in our history.
Wow. So you guys have Michael Carter Williams, Bruce Brown, Terance Mann, Nerlens Noel.
Yep. George Niang and Jake Layman. George is with Utah and Jake's with Minnesota. 6.
Yeah, that's big right there. Not too many people could say they have more than 2 or 3. You have 6.
And 2 years. Yeah, you had Wayne Selden and Bonzi Colson last year. They're both playing overseas. So we had 8. Last couple of years. Both those guys went overseas at a high level.
That's big right there. Now, let's talk about some of the current players that BABC has, and are y'all still with the EYBL or?
Yeah, we just signed a multi-year deal, and last year, because we really didn't have any juniors, had there been EYB, the deal we made, we were just going to play in the 9th and 10th grade EYB, which is not EYBL, because we only had we only had one kid who's a senior this year, Jaden Brown up at Tilton, Providence kid, was Terrell Brown from Pittsburgh's brother. Mm-hmm. So last year we weren't going to play in the 11th grade EYBL, but we're back, and we got a multi-year deal, and we're going forward. We're there's only 2 original Nike teams left, us and Boo Williams from '96, and
wow.
we got the word that there will be an EYBL season this year. Post COVID, they haven't announced the dates yet. Carlton DeBose and Jamal James do a great job. We just got a memo today that the league will be going forward. Maybe not starting as early, but it will happen, and we will we'll be part of it. Yeah.
Wow, that's big right there. I can't wait. So I mean, talk about some of the players that are involved with the program right now coming up.
Right now, I would say, and I'm not a guy that's talking about the next this, next that. In our junior class, Dasonte Bowen's a good one. He'll be a high major kid. That's not the deepest class, but the current freshman and sophomore class, I'm not going to say who they are, but there'll be 3 to 5 pros. Some of the better players on the EYBL team will probably start 3 or 4 sophomores. That guy's playing up. T.J. Power, who's at Worcester Academy. Tre Norman's at Worcester Academy. Reid Ducharme at Noble and Greeno. And I'm not saying those guys are going to be pros. You have to guess that because I don't want to get nobody in trouble. But, we're really, really, really deep. I would say between the current freshman and sophomore class, we got 21 to 22 mid to high major players. It goes in cycles like that. So we're looking to get on the court. We didn't play it all this past season. The rules up here where the gyms were closed, I could go out of state. Brittany makes that call. My daughter, she follows the rules. What we did was we went back to the future. We went 3 nights a week, 5 to 8 outside. It's light out. The light stays late in June, July, August. Some of the nights, 5 o'clock, it's 95 degrees. We worked those guys out 3 nights a week. We played among ourselves right through June, July, and August. And like I said, collectively, depth-wise, we haven't had 2 classes deep like this maybe in our history for the freshman and sophomore class. And I'm not big on rankings. I tell kids all the time, rankings count in boxing, wrestling, tennis, and golf, because that's how you get paid, where you rank. I'm putting my NBA hat on now and just say I'm talking to you. And when you play that, you played for Tiny at Lincoln, you were the number 39 guy. And you come to and I used to do all the interviews for Boston, with the draft guys. I'd say, well, tell me about yourself. And if you started off, I'd say, son, let me tell you something right now. We're going to start training camp in about 3 months if we draft you. I would look you right in the eye, and you bring that bullshit about your ranking to a man's game, you're going to get hurt. Wow. You're going to get hurt mentally. You're going to get hurt physically, because that isn't how it works. Rankings are worthless. I'll be real with young guys. You want to play in the higher levels. There's one thing you have to do. You have to contribute to the franchise winning on, in, or off the court by your ability, your character, your practice skills, your character skills. That's what it's all about. You come to me with my NBA hat on, talking about where you were ranked, I'm going to think you're a fool. That's worthless information. Well, I was number 11 in my senior year, ranked in high school by so-and-so. Well, you know something? That don't make no difference to me. I watched you play 50 times in college, so I know your game inside out. When I'm interviewing you, I want to see what you got to say about yourself, about your family, about your friends, about your background, just like any other job. Now you're coming into our house. The NBA, for 9 months, you're doing one of 3 things every day. You're practicing, you're playing, or you're flying. That's all you do. Those 3 things for 9 months. So one of the things you mentioned, Bruce Brown and Terance Mann. It's the other night, Bruce had a couple of DNPs. They make the trade. He finds a way to start in the lineup. You see his numbers? 15 points, 14 rebounds from the point guard position for the Nets the other night. Terance Mann, Patrick Beverley's hurt the other night for the Clippers. 13 points, 9 rebounds. Those guys are grinders. They get it. They were second-round picks. They're on teams that have a chance to win championships. Some nights they don't play, some nights they do. But when they do, they contribute to winning. When they don't play, their body language, they contribute to winning. So any young fellow listening that wants to tell me about their rankings, I'll tell you, you know something, son? I don't want you here. I can't have you around like that, this me stuff. We tell kids all the time on BABC, all the time when they have freshman year, when you take your first trip and you're going to go home, your folks are going to say to you, how did you do? And there's 2 ways you can answer that. You can say, I didn't get no run. I didn't get no shots. I didn't get no whistles. I don't want to hear that either. You know what I want to hear? We did well. We won. We did well. We got to the Final Four. We did well. We got to the finals. This is a we sport, a team sport. If you don't address the game like that, okay, it's real simple. Go to golf, go to tennis, go box, go wrestle, because then you don't have to worry about your team. It's you against the world. Track and field, great sports, all great, but they're individual sports. This is a team sport. If your assignment is to stand on your head at half court to help your team win and never touch a basketball for 48 minutes, that's what you do. If that's what the people determine your role is, okay? There's no room for me. You got your what you call mail carriers, okay? Jordan, LeBron, Kobe, those were mail carriers. What a mail carrier does is me, you, and my 2 dogs are the other 4 starters, and they're still going to go 41 and 41. That's how good they are. So you understand that, and that's a pecking order, okay? For the rest of the guys in the game, you got to have a role, and that role has to do what? Let's say it one more time. Contribute to winning, whether you're playing 1 minute, 0 minutes, 48 minutes, whether you're getting 1 shot, no shots. It's real simple. If you come in here with that me and this and that stuff, you're going home. And I know that sounds rough, but that's reality, my friend. That is basketball, NBA reality. So a lot of young guys that want to tell me about some guy ran in the gym and had him number 2 in New York and number 20 in the East and number 30. Son, don't bring that around me. And I'm trust me, I'm not the only guy seeing it that way, because that's delusional. Okay, that's not how it works. There's 30 teams, 15 guys, not counting the 2 ways. That's 450 guys. They come from all over the planet now. 30% of the guys come from outside America. There's not a whole lot of gigs in this world, in this pro basketball NBA world. So all this nonsense about I'm going to the league, yeah, you might be, but when you get that chance, you better have your head on straight, and what comes out of your mouth better be the things I'm saying, or you're going home. End of story.
Y'all heard it, kids. Y'all heard it first.
So you got, and in fairness to kids, you got people in the game. I don't like when I read about a handler or something like that, right? About this kid going to be the greatest since so and so, and the best in Brooklyn since Marbury and this and that. I don't want to hear handlers talking about, promoting kids.
Yeah,
I'll go watch the game myself, and whatever I think. If I'm right, I'll get rehired. If I'm wrong, I'll get fired. That's on me.
Yeah.
But what you're doing with kids, you're filling them up with delusions. You're filling them up with goals that may be unrealistic at a very young age about I'm going to the league. Like you said, I didn't have the gift of an education, because I didn't have the ability or the discipline to gain an education. For whatever reason, took an alternative path to the NBA. And that's not available today, because a lot of the game in the NBA now is, analytics and education and MIT and all that stuff, which is fine. That's the way they want to go. That's fine. That's not me. I respect it, but I don't have that ability. But point is, if you want to go to that level, you got to understand what the rules are. I just think back in the successful Garnett era in Boston. God forbid a young buck came in with that type of MO about, me and I did this and that. Trust me, by the end of the first day in training camp, that young man would be in tears.
in tears because he would get broken down and told about himself, about what he can do. If you're, like I said, if your job is to set screens, standing on your head, and never touch the ball for 48 minutes, we're going to give you a couple of mil. That's what you do, son. That's how it works. This ain't a me game. It's a we game. And it's funny, you mentioned the big timers. You know, the Bryants, God rest his soul, who we had a great relationship, friendship with, you know, going back to the first game he ever played in America when he came from Italy was going to ninth grade. He was on the Sunny Hill freshman, and Jamal had about 60 on him down in Temple. And Joe took me over. His dad, who was a dear friend. The kid was in tears, and Joe said, you know, I don't know if he's going to play soccer or basketball. But Italy loves that soccer. I said, Joe, he's going to be good. He said, why? I said, he's got a heart. He was getting his ass kicked, and he wanted to get in a fight with Jamal Jackson because he had so much pride. But
wow.
Point is, Jordan, Jackson, LeBron, I used to tell guys, if they're playing in October in an exhibition game 2 days after training camp up at Penn State with 200 people in the stands, and they're going to play one quarter, exhibition, did you ever see those guys not give all out, balls all out? No, because they don't. They were better than everybody, yeah, but their effort was better than everybody's too. So you take their God-givens, you know, God gave them a lot, obviously, those three guys. Yet, and you combine them with the character and the steel trap mind. When you think of those three guys, what do they talk about? Winning championships, not scoring titles, not all-time leading scorer, not MVPs, not all-star games. They judge themselves. I'm looking at my fingers, how many rings I got. So if the greatest that ever played the game approach it with that type of ferocity about winning, the rest of us just got to get in line and do our little thing to contribute. Even if, like I said, not to wear it out. If you're standing on your head at half court sending screens and never touching the rock. If that's your assignment, that's what pros do. That's what men do.
You said it best. And that kid, Reid Ducharme, is definitely going to be special. I've seen him a couple times in New York.
He went down New York. When some looked like an outdoor event, we saw some film on it. They were carrying him off the court. You know, yeah, he's a great kid.
I remember that day. Yeah,
a great family. He's a great kid. Great. He's in a very high level academic school, Noble and Greeno, in a private school, independent league, and he's going places in life. You know, he was a quarterback, and he gave it up this year. Of course, there's no football this past year. I think he's going to give it up, but you know, Michigan was sniffing around for him as a quarterback too. I love multi-sport guys. I love guys who played football. We talked about Dana Barros. Here's why. For those of us who played football, nobody sees your face. You got 20 pounds of gear on, and you get hit, and you get hit hard. And if people don't block for you when you're a quarterback, you're going to get hurt. Same as a running back. So in football, you learn the value of teammates and the value of teammates, especially your linemen. If you're a receiver or a quarterback or a running back, football humbles everybody because of the viciousness of it. I love guys that play football. Bruce Brown, when we first came to us going to after 8th grade, my money was on he'd be in the NFL right now. And I tell you what, if basketball went away, and give him about 6 months, he'd be in the NFL the following year. He's you know, they're saying that type of dude. He's that type of dude, and he'd be successful in the NFL. He's right in your neighborhood now with the Nets. So you know, and like I said, I don't know if you caught the comments that Durant made the other night about him when he had the first start at 15 points and 14 rebounds. Like what? What position you play? I'm a combo, mostly point. You had how many rebounds? You mean that all season? No, one played 20-something minutes, 14 rebounds. End of story. That tells you what? That tells you he want to win. Give me that ball. Go into traffic and get the ball off the glass. You know, so that's who he is. The net people are going to love him.
Indeed. So this is one of the questions I'd love to ask on this show, on this podcast, before I lead up to the final question. If you could go back in a time machine to 1977, what would you tell a 23-year-old Leo, as he's coaching the semi-pro team in the EBA and starting up BABC?
You know, for me, we are who we are. And my little girl who I love to death, she's a grown woman now. She's my right-hand man in all my businesses. She runs the bar, restaurant. She runs all our real estate. She's sort of like my boss. She says, you know, Dad, you're a little rough around the edges. You know what I mean? You don't come off, you know, corporate. You don't come off bougie. You know, I'd say to myself, Leo, you may not, if you were breaking in today with your style, your look, you probably wouldn't get in the game like you did because it's more corporate now.
Mm.
So I'd have to make that decision, you know, almost 50 years later to kind of go that route or stay who I am. So I would just stay who I am, and there never would have been no NBA, I guess, because today it's different. And I'm not saying it's bad, it's good, you know, for basically a street dude, you know, that you know, a high school washout, college dropout, you know, I'm keeping it real. You know, I don't know that today, if I went knocking on NBA doors or whatever, they'd answer. But, you know, so I'd have to come to terms saying, all right, you know, which guy you want to be. Now, you know, I probably would have been able to kept doing BABC because that came from my mind, you know, and you can do what you want there, but it's just a question of who you want to be in life and what you're comfortable doing. I'm comfortable, you know, in a, you know, I'm comfortable sort of the way that, you know, the way that we're talking here, just keeping it real. And a real dude like yourself, I've always respected and admired you from a distance. I really appreciate you having me. Yeah. So I'd have to determine my fate, so to speak, on you know, which route I want to go. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying going that corporate, you know, route is bad. Don't get me wrong. I know plenty of guys who did that I admire and respect and love. But for me, it was always a question. My path was a little bit different, clearly. There's probably surprised you in some of the stuff I've told you tonight. You knew me from a distance, but this has been, we're talking 50 years of a man's life. I'm an old dude now. I could go tomorrow, you know, but you know, you can keep this. And this is, there used to be a show when I was a kid called This Is Your Life. Well, this is my life. And I'd have to determine, you know, which there are guys I think that maybe front a little bit to get places, and I'm never comfortable with that. You know, you got to be able to walk in your own shoes. I'm a grandson of immigrants. I'm an urban white guy, and you know that's who I am, and that's what I was born. That's what I'll die. So I'd have to ask myself, you know, 50 years from now, if the world is different, where you want to be. But I'd say I'd just keep it like it was, you know, and you want to judge me. You don't. You want to love me. You don't. You know, it's just, that's just me, you know? So it's probably not your conventional interview, you know?
Nah, you keeping it 100, Leo. I respect that. But final question, what's next in the future for Leo Papile and BABC?
I want to make 50, which would be 2027. Now my daughter's the boss. We're a charity. She did a thing over Thanksgiving, feeding 10,000 people from our restaurant, you know, with gift certificates. And don't forget, we ain't doing a whole lot of money making now with COVID because you know the bars closed and the clubs closed. But you know, so she's the boss. She's executive director of BABC, and she decides who the coaches are. And she wouldn't be afraid to fire my ass. Say, look, you can be an advisor, this and that. I want to make 50 years of BABC. And then if I do that, and God is good enough to give me 7 more seasons, you know, we'll go from there. My goal is to try to make 50 years. I was in the gym this morning. Even with COVID, I still box. We can't box live, but I get 12 rounds in a heavy bag at 66, 3-minute rounds, about 200 punches a round. So I'm doing my best to keep my body going, but you know, you never know. You know, we've lost some great ones with this COVID, you know, guys my age, you know, Bobby Bigelow was a high school class of 71 out in the suburbs, played for us in the EBA, the NBA minor league, and he went to bed one night and didn't wake up. You know, who knows? You know, like you get older, you say, hey, but in a perfect world, yeah, give me that 50 years of BABC, then we go from there.
Yeah. Well, Leo, thank you for coming on to share your testimony, and I wish you and BABC nothing but the best moving forward.
Well, having a young man like yourself, who clearly has a tremendous respect for the history of the game, tremendous knowledge, I think that we're a little bit like kindred brothers here, because I noticed in your conversations, in your questioning, you respect the past of the game, and clearly I do. I defer to my elders in the game, the Red Auerbachs, the Bill Russells, the pioneers. That's how I was raised. You clearly were raised in the same way, and I applaud you for that. And that comes from the bottom of my heart. So keep doing what you're doing, and it was an honor to be here. And we get going for our podcast. We may fly you up to Slade's, and we're going to do it right out of our bar, the oldest bar in Boston now, 1931, Slade's Bar and Grill. And like I said, Bill Russell owned it, and when he was with the Celtics, so it's part of the legacy. And we're gonna start podcasting out of there ourselves. So this gave me a warm up, but I'll be on the other side asking the questions.
I'll definitely take that Greyhound the Trailways trip up there for sure.
No, we'll put you on JetBlue, brother. Don't worry.
All right, bet. Well, everybody, this is episode 101 of Hoops Talk with Dave's Joint. Shout outs to my man Leo Papile, for coming on to tell his story. Everybody, for those of you from Quincy, Boston, those of you that have been with the Celtics organization, and if you're a true supporter of BABC and Slade's Bar and Grill in Boston, go check out this episode on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram TV. And
we'll run this at the bar. Actually, we'll hype you up. All we got to do is look for episode 101, right?
Indeed. So everybody, go support BABC on the Nike EYBL circuit this summer. Everybody, stay safe, stay blessed. Peace.
Same here, brother. I love you, and you.